Chapter 214. After breakfast, the group continued on their way. When they left, they also drove the car that they had driven here. There were 2 cars in total. One was driven by Yan Hanqing, and the other was driven by Xiaoqing. Just as Xiaoqing carried Little Bao into the car, Dai and Yan Qiyu took the initiative to squeeze into the car. Each of them took a seat. Gu Panpan wanted to stuff Gu Chuan into the car, but with Xiao Tong in the car, there was no more space. Thus, she could only sit in a car driven by Yan Hanqing with her brother, Fu Jingma, and the others. Xiaoqing didn't need to look back. Through the rearview mirror, she could see Dai sitting on the left, Yan Qiyu on the right, and Little Bao holding Ye in the middle. Little Bao blinked his big eyes, looking left and right. Then, he began to pout and crawled towards Xiao Tong's seat. Little Bao crawled into Xiao Tong's arms, and Xiao Tong hugged him with a faint smile on her face. Now, in Xiaoqing's team, the one who improved the fastest wasn't Yan Hanqing, who had the lightning ability, or Gu Chuan, who had the ice ability, but Xiao Tong. She benefited from the special crystal hanging around her neck, and now, she was infinitely close to level 4. With a little stimulation, she could become the second level 4 ability user in the team. The one who improved the second fastest was Yan Hanqing. He turned from an ordinary person to an ability user, so he could endure hardships and was the most hardworking one. Without Xiao Tong's cheat-like abilities, he was the only one in the team who was second only to Xiao Tong. As for the slowest progress, it was probably Dumbo. If zombies wanted to evolve, the fastest way was to eat human beings, especially paranormals. Human flesh and blood could provide them with a huge amount of energy, far more than the energy provided by zombie nuclei at the same level. Paranormals could provide them with even more energy. What was the relationship between Dai and Xiaoqing before? Xiaoqing didn't know, but after following Xiaoqing, he definitely didn't eat even a bite of flesh, which caused his progress to be much slower than normal zombies. Now, most of the zombies had evolved to level 2, and some of them had evolved to level 3. There were even quite a number of level 4 zombies, and some level 5 zombies. However, Dai was still at the peak of level 2, which was why he was easily captured by Abe Shizuk's men. Although Dai's fighting power was comparable to level 3 zombies because of his special body, he was still far behind other people. So, Dai was actually a little depressed. A long time ago, when he first met Xiaoqing, he didn't even have emotions. But now, he had learned those complicated feelings, and even learned to keep the unhappy things in his heart. However, Xiaoqing was very clear about his situation, and she was already thinking of a way. She would never let Dai eat humans. If Dai ate humans, what was the difference between him and those ordinary zombies? Moreover, things like flesh and blood were addictive. Just like her, she had to drink some of Yan Qiyue's blood in a special situation. Now, every time there was a full moon, her thirst for blood would increase infinitely. Xiaoqing didn't want Dai to become like that. She hoped to maintain the purity of Dai. At least one day, if Dai returned to normal and remembered everything, he wouldn't find out that he had eaten his own kind. Xiaoqing was thinking while driving. Human flesh and blood could make zombies evolve, what about mutant animals? Could it also work? Soon, Xiaoqing denied this idea. She had eaten a lot of cooked mutant animals, but she spat them all out. Although she hadn't tried raw meat, the effect wouldn't be different just because it was raw. Chapter 215. Or, the blood of mutated animals might be useful. After all, mutated animals contained a lot of energy in their bodies. Normal paranormals like Yan Hanqing often ate mutated animals, which was good for upgrading their superpowers. Xiaoqing thought about a lot of things, but all of this could only be confirmed after an experiment. While she was thinking, she suddenly saw a person lying on the road in front of them. It was a woman, wearing loose pink clothes, covering her belly with one hand. Her hair and clothes were a little dirty. Xiao Qing immediately stopped the car. Before she ran over the woman, Yan Hanqing also stopped the car. It might be a pregnant woman in front of us. Let's go and see. Xiao Qing got out of the car first, followed by Yan Qiue and Er Dai. Xiao Qing hurried over and helped the woman up. Are you okay? Before the last word was finished, the pregnant woman suddenly stretched out her hands toward Xiao Qing. The nails on her hands were more than 10 centimeters long, sharp, and gloomy. Under her disheveled hair was a half-rotten face. How was she a pregnant woman? She was clearly a zombie. Fortunately, Xiao Qing was very vigilant. A pregnant woman lying in the middle of the road was very sudden, so she would definitely be more vigilant. If the woman lying on the ground was not a pregnant woman, she would not even stop the car. Although she would not run over the woman cruelly, she would take a detour and leave directly. As soon as the pregnant zombie made a move, Xiao Qing kicked the zombie's chest, and then turned around and took 2 steps back. The zombie rolled on the ground, and a pillow rolled out of its bulging belly. It probably knew that Xiao Qing was not to be trifled with, so it got up and went into the woods by the roadside. After a few moves, it disappeared. Yan Hanqing and the others who came later hurriedly asked Xiao Qing, "Are you okay?" Xiao Qing shook her head. Her reaction was very fast, so she was not injured at all. The others heaved a sigh of relief, but Xiao Qing's heart was in her mouth. Everyone, be careful. She was worried about nothing but the evolution speed of zombies. How long had it been? There were already zombies who could make such a delicate ambush. If the person who was ambushed was not Xiao Qing, she would probably die on the spot. After all, almost no one would suspect that a zombie would pretend to be a pregnant woman to deceive people. This zombie was definitely very intelligent. She even learned to put a pillow in her clothes and pretend to be pregnant. The intelligence of the zombies was already very scary. Don't forget that Xiao Qing and the others were still in a relatively remote place. The more remote the place was, the smaller the population, and the weaker the zombies that came out. The zombies near or in the big cities had eaten a lot of people in the early days of Doomsday. Their evolution speed was much faster than the zombies in these remote places. But the zombies in these remote places had already learned to deceive people. Then, how far had the zombies in the big cities evolved? It seemed that people were not scared when they said that there were already level 5 zombies. According to the evolution speed, level 5 zombies were normal. This encounter made Xiao Qing even more eager to become stronger. Although she was already strong among the superpowered people, the zombies were evolving. If she couldn't keep up with them, she wouldn't be able to escape the next ambush so easily. Xiao Qing now had a lot of people around her who needed her protection. She had no right to be capricious. She had to work hard. After going back to the S-City survivor base, we will take a big task. Xiao Qing took a deep breath and then said. On the way back, they would definitely encounter more zombies. When they encountered zombies, Xiao Qing would let Gu Panpan and the others fight. Then, she would see how much their strength had increased during this period. After all, one had to know oneself and know one's enemy in order to be victorious in every battle. Once Xiao Qing had a clear understanding of Gu Panpan's strength, she would be able to go back and accept missions based on their strength and go out to gain experience. Superpowered people could not become stronger by hiding at home and constantly absorbing crystals. Without going through life and death battles, superpowered people could not withstand a single blow. Think about it, one was a tree that grew tenaciously in the wind and rain, and the other was a flower that grew in a greenhouse. How could their fighting strength be the same? Xiao Qing hoped that each of her friends could grow into a towering tree. Then, even if there was an accident in the future, when they were separated, they could protect themselves. Chapter 216. Xiao Qing originally thought that the zombie who pretended to be a pregnant woman would know her place and would not appear again. She did not expect that at night, when Xiaoqing was sleeping, the curtain would be opened. For the past few days, the two men would go back to their own tents to sleep in the first half of the night. In the second half of the night, they would silently sneak into Xiaoqing's tent, one on the left and one on the right. They almost turned Xiaoqing into meat buns. But tonight was different. When the curtain was opened, a faint smell of blood mixed with a rotten smell floated in. Xiaoqing originally thought that it was Dai and Yan Qiue, so she was too lazy to open her eyes. But once she smelled that smell, Xiaoqing knew that it was definitely not those two who came. This rotten smell of blood usually appeared on zombies. Xiaoqing immediately opened her eyes. The vines had already broken through the ground. The zombie that sneaked in did not face Xiaoqing directly. It lowered its head and rolled forward to avoid the vines. It reached out to grab Little Bun. Coincidentally, Yiya was lying on Little Bun's stomach sleeping. When the sound of something breaking through the air sounded, it opened its eyes groggily and instinctively took a bite. The zombie's flesh was stiff and rotten, so the taste must be terrible. After Yiya took a bite, it lay on Little Bun's stomach and vomited. This was probably the most disgusting thing it had ever tasted in its life. Yiya's bite exposed the zombie's target. The reason for its sneak attack tonight was actually Little Bun. Xiaoqing did not say anything and first threw out a lantern flower. That lantern flower was picked by her when she was in the forest. Because its color and shape were unique and it could glow at night, she kept it. As soon as the lantern was thrown out, it hung on the roof of the tent, and the pink light illuminated the entire tent. The zombie was also exposed. She was wearing a pink dress with a tattered collar. Her exposed chest was a mass of rotten meat. Xiaoqing was familiar with this zombie. Wasn't it the scammer zombie they met during the day? This zombie was very bold. It dared to attack them in the middle of the night after messing with them during the day. Xiaoqing wasn't going to let it go this time. She closed her fingers, and the vines that emerged immediately formed a cage-like cage, trying to trap the zombie inside. However, this zombie was very smart. When it saw Xiaoqing attacking it, it didn't even try to fight back. It just turned around and ran. However, it was unlucky. When it turned around, it ran into Dai, who was also attacking at night. Dummy was shocked. It reached out its paw reflexively and slapped Dummy back into the tent. Dummy happened to be caught by the formed cage. The zombie was still restless after being locked in the cage. It kept trying to use its claws and teeth to break the vines. However, Xiaoqing's vines were stronger than it expected. Its claws were almost broken, but it couldn't even scratch off a single thorn. Xiaoqing used the vines to hang the cage up and hung it at the entrance of the tent. After all, the scratching sounds made by the zombie would disturb Little Bao's sleep. After everything was settled, Xiaoqing opened the blanket and said to Dai, "Why are you still standing outside? Go to sleep." Dai didn't say anything and crawled into the blanket. He happily hugged Xiaoqing's waist. Originally, he tried to rub Xiaoqing's chest. In the past, he often used this action to take advantage of Xiaoqing. After taking advantage of her, he blinked his eyes and put on an innocent expression. However, this time, he was slapped into the blanket by Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing used a lot of strength. Dai's face was facing down. His nose was sore. In the past, this move had always worked. Why didn't it work this time? Chapter 217. Before Dai could figure it out, Yan Qiue also sneaked in. As soon as he arrived, he saw the cage hanging at the door and the zombie in the cage. He immediately adjusted his expression and rushed in with a worried face. Although Yan Qiue knew that with Xiaoqing's strength, it was impossible for her to get hurt, after Yan Qiue rushed in, she found a spot and prepared to plunge into Xiaoqing's arms to express her worry and fear. Of course, she could also use the excuse of checking if Xiao Qing was injured to take advantage of her. However, before he could jump into Xiao Qing's arms, he was slapped to the ground. Yan Qiue was speechless. Xiao Qing didn't want to indulge them anymore. She pulled the quilt and said coldly, "Go to sleep." No matter how much they wanted to do, they had to go to sleep. The next morning, Xiao Qing got up and went to brush her teeth and wash her face. She also took a carrot and fed it to Yaya as a reward. After all, it did a good job last night. After washing up, it was time to deal with the zombie. If it hadn't tried to attack the little bun in the middle of the night, Xiao Qing wouldn't have minded it running away. However, it dared to attack the little bun, which crossed Xiao Qing's bottom line. Xiao Qing studied it carefully. It was only a level 3 zombie, but it had mutated a little, so it was a little smarter than ordinary zombies. After studying it, Xiao Qing cut it into pieces and took out the crystal. Yan Qiue also dissected the zombie's body to study the reason why it became smarter. Then, Yan Qiue was beaten up, because when he was dissecting the zombie, the others were eating breakfast. Then, he spread a mattress on the ground outside the tent and dissected the zombie. The air was filled with the smell of blood and rot, and the internal organs, especially the intestines, were all over the ground. It was a sour feeling. Gu Panpan took the lead and put down the bowl of porridge, then beat Yan Qiue down. In fact, Yan Qiue couldn't be blamed. All the researchers were like that. Once they were curious, they didn't care where they were, so it was reasonable that he was beaten up. After dealing with the zombie, Xiao Qing's heart was in her mouth. She found a very bad phenomenon. The little bun seemed to have a special attraction to zombies. It was like a foodie seeing delicious food, or a money grubber seeing gold. It was even more intense than that. Let's not talk about other zombies, just this zombie's intelligence was higher than that of ordinary zombies, so when it first met Xiao Qing, it immediately ran away when it found out that Xiao Qing was stronger than it, and there were more of them. However, in the middle of the night, it couldn't resist its desire and sneaked back to attack the little bun. This proved that the little bun was very attractive to zombies. For this reason, Xiao Qing asked Dai. After all, Dai was the only one among them that was closer to ordinary zombies. Dai told Xiao Qing accurately that when he saw the little bun, he also had an impulse. His subconscious told him that if he ate the little bun's flesh and blood, it would bring him a lot of improvement. Moreover, as the little bun leveled up, the temptation would become even greater. However, Dai had intelligence. The biggest difference between humans and beasts was that humans could use their intelligence to overcome their desires, while beasts could only succumb to their desires. Dai could control his urges, but ordinary zombies couldn't. This was also the reason why there were zombies coming for the little bun. Chapter 218. Xiao Qing couldn't help but worry. Little Bun had become the target of zombies, and he didn't have much ability to protect himself. If he was left alone, it would be too dangerous. Little Bun also had a special ability that was similar to devouring. He could devour a lot of things, such as superpowers and people's vitality. His devouring also worked on zombies, but the amount of energy he could devour was limited. Last time, when Little Bun devoured Xiao Yu in Linchuan Survivor Base, the energy in his body expanded for a long time before it was digested. Xiao Yu's level wasn't high. If it were a level 3 superpower user, Little Bun would probably only be able to devour a small part of the energy. If he tried to devour it forcefully, he would probably explode. When Little Bun reached level 3, he would be able to devour as much as he wanted. However, he couldn't devour too much, and his devouring ability would only work when he came into contact with the other party. This ability was actually quite useful. Most people wouldn't guard against a 4 or 5-year-old child. However, Xiao Qing couldn't bet that those people or zombies who had evil intentions towards Little Bun would show mercy to him. Therefore, how to protect Little Bun became a big problem. Especially zombies. If they caught Little Bun, their first reaction would probably be to eat him directly. Xiao Qing couldn't let her son be too far away from her. Not to mention her line of sight, it was best to keep him within a few meters. Only then would she feel at ease. It was useless to think too much. The best way to deal with it was to deal with it as it came. Xiao Qing thought about a lot of things, but in the end, she could only sigh and look at Ye in Little Bun's arms. Although Ye's fighting ability was pitifully low, it could still be of some help if something happened. Xiao Qing made up her mind to train Ye. On the road this time, Yan Qiue was the one driving. Then, Xiao Qing began to rummage through the stock. After rummaging through the stock, she opened Ye's mouth and began to feed him. Ah, no, it was feeding him like a rabbit. The things she fed Ye were all good stuff. Some of them were high-leveled zombie crystal nuclei. Most of them were around level 2. She and her companions had no use for them, but to Ye, they were already high-leveled crystals. There were also some plants that were beneficial to the evolution of mutated animals, as well as the crystal nuclei in the mutated animals. In short, Ye was in pain and joy the entire morning. After walking for less than half an hour, Ye had already risen to pinnacle level 3. Although its pinnacle level 3 was not as strong as those ferocious large beasts because of its race, its attack power was definitely not as strong as those ferocious large beasts. Also, because it was filled with crystals, it was much weaker than the average pinnacle level 3 mutated beasts. Most importantly, Ye was timid. When she thought about it, she suddenly felt that it was useless. It could be roasted and eaten. Ye couldn't help but shrink its neck. It felt its anus tighten, and its entire body turned cold. Its rabbit fur couldn't help but stand up. After leveling up, Ye was thrown back into Little Bun's arms by Xiao Qing. Ye was still very happy at that moment. It was especially grateful to Xiao Qing. If it had succumbed to Xiao Qing's strength and didn't dare to escape, it wouldn't have done so now even if someone else asked it to. Soon, Ye felt that it would be better to run if there was a chance. This was because during the afternoon break, Xiao Qing started to treat Ye like a dog. The reason was that Ye was already at level 3, but its combat ability was still very weak. Its reflexes and other aspects weren't high, so it still needed to go through a certain amount of training. Chapter 219. Thus, Xiao Qing caught a few mutated rats and cats and let Ye chase after them. It was fine if they couldn't catch up, but they wouldn't be able to eat lunch or dinner. Whether they would be able to eat tomorrow depended on their mood. Ye held back her tears and ran out like a dog. She would come back with a mutated rat in her mouth, and then she would come back with a mutated cat in her mouth. Those mutated animals would fight back. Ye's face was scratched and she looked very pitiful. In the end, Little Bun felt sorry for Ye and hugged Ye tightly. Xiao Qing originally wanted to train a more qualified bodyguard to protect Little Bun, but he had no choice but to let Ye go. Ye looked at Xiao Qing with a bitter face the whole time. In the end, she lowered her only big ear and curled up in Little Bun's arms pitifully. At this point it was necessary to talk about the recovery ability of different species. In the case of humans, after the apocalypse, even ordinary people's recovery ability was much higher than before the apocalypse. This was probably the adaptability of humans. Humans were constantly adapting to the environment, and their bodies evolved accordingly. Thus, after the apocalypse, most ordinary people's bodies were very good. At least, unless there were special circumstances, such as an infection after an injury, or a weak body due to an injury, very few people would fall sick. The recovery ability of a psychic was much higher than that of an ordinary person. For the same injury, an ordinary person would need 10 days to recover, while a psychic would only need 3 to 5 days. However, Xiao Qing and Air Dai only needed a day, or even a few hours. Not all zombies had terrifying recovery abilities like them. Because zombies were already dead, ordinary fatal injuries were no longer fatal to them. Many zombies had lost 4 limbs, half of their bodies, and even only had their heads left. They could still open their mouths and bite people. Only when their heads were smashed would they truly die. However, most of the zombies that lost a part of their body wouldn't grow it back. At most, they wouldn't be seriously injured, and they wouldn't be like humans, who lost too much blood and lost their ability to fight. That was all. A small portion of zombies had strong recovery abilities. They ate the flesh and blood of their own kind to replenish themselves. For example, there was a zombie that had a hole in its stomach. It ate its own kind and then the hole in its stomach grew back. There were also similar situations. Mutant animals were different from humans and zombies. They would bleed when they were injured, and their flesh did not contain toxins like zombies. They would slowly recover after being injured. Most mutant animals recovered faster than paranormals. Yaya's face was badly scratched, but the next day, it was still alive and kicking. The wounds on its face were almost unrecognizable. Every time this happened, Xiaoqing couldn't help but look at the corner of Dai's eyes. There was a long scar at the corner of his eyes, from his eyebrows to his cheek. It was almost a finger's length below his eye. According to common sense, Dai's wound should have healed to the point that there wasn't even a scar left. However, the scar was still there. The scar wasn't ugly, but it made Dai's handsome face look a bit more ferocious. Even if it was ugly, it didn't matter because Xiaoqing wouldn't mind. However, Dai minded it very much. He often secretly looked at his own face through the reflection mirror. Every time he saw the scar, he couldn't help but show a disgusted expression. Especially when Yan Qiue was sitting next to him as a comparison. His beast's intuition made him feel a huge threat from Yan Qiue. Just like how a male animal would show his most majestic side to a female when he was courting her, Dai always felt that he wanted to show his best side to Xiaoqing. However, it was obvious that the scar ruined his perfect side. No matter how he looked at it, he felt that the scar was very abrupt and ugly. In the past, Dai never cared about his appearance. However, he started to care about it now. Although he didn't show it, Xiaoqing could feel it. For example, when he slept, he liked to sleep on the left side of his face. When he turned his face to the side, he would press the corner of his right eye against the pillow. This way, the scar wouldn't be exposed. Another example was when he sat next to Xiaoqing. He would deliberately turn his right face to the side and use the left side of his face to face Xiaoqing. There were many situations like this. Even if Xiaoqing was slow, she would still notice it when it accumulated. Moreover, Xiaoqing was a very sensitive person. She noticed it early on. She didn't think that Dai was being pretentious. However, she rarely saw Dai like this. She felt that it was a little funny. Therefore, she had been secretly observing him. Dai was obviously very confused. Especially the men around him. They were all very outstanding. If Dai stood among a group of ordinary men, the small scar wouldn't be a big deal. However, when he stood among a group of outstanding men, the small flaw would be infinitely magnified. Dai was very sad. Although he was a zombie and had the intelligence of a child, he had the intuition of a beast. He could tell if some people had bad intentions with just a glance. On the other hand, he could tell that some people had feelings for Xiaoqing. At least for now, none of the men around Xiaoqing were easy to deal with. In this kind of situation where he was surrounded by love rivals, Dai was very anxious. Therefore, the flaw of a scar would be infinitely magnified in his heart. Sometimes when Dai talked to Yan Qiue or Gu Chuan, Dai couldn't help but wonder if Xiaoqing was disgusted with him. Xiaoqing thought that his behavior was very cute. After all, Xiaoqing had never seen Dai like this. Therefore, she felt that it was a little strange. However, after seeing Dai for a while, Xiao Qing started to feel sorry for him. She didn't want to see him like this anymore. Xiao Qing touched her chin. How could she comfort Dai? Chapter 220. Xiao Qing's method of dealing with it was very simple. She kissed Dai's scar. Dai was stunned at that time and didn't come back to his senses for a long time. The one who reacted the most was Yan Qiue. He was holding a half-peeled apple, but he crushed it with a crack. The pulp and core fell to the ground, and even the fruit knife was twisted by him. The mole at the corner of Yan Qiue's eye became more and more colorful. He looked at Xiao Qing, feeling very wronged. Qing didn't even kiss him. In contrast, Dai came back to life on the spot. He nestled in Xiao Qing's arms and was very happy, which made Yan Qiue even more pitiful. He held the fruit knife that had become S-shaped and looked at Xiao Qing pitifully. His eyes were full of hidden bitterness and accusation. Xiao Qing kissed Dai because she saw Dai as family. Would you care about the propriety between men and women when you kissed your own brother? The second reason was to appease Dai. After all, Dai's depressed look was too pitiful. However, Yan Qiue was different. Yan Qiue had clearly said that he liked Xiao Qing. Yan Qiue was by Xiao Qing's side as a suitor. It was not appropriate to kiss Yan Qiue. So Xiao Qing looked straight ahead seriously and chose to ignore Yan Qiue's sad little eyes. Yan Qiue actually persisted the whole way, looking at Xiao Qing with the same gaze. On the way back, they passed by Linchuan survivor base, but Yan Qiue didn't want to go back and take a look. Xiao Mo was too shrewd. He couldn't handle it. So they took a detour. However, they still had to find a survivor base to rest and reorganize. Xiao Qing spread out the map. This map was bought in the capital, and it showed most of the survivor bases in the country. As long as it was a proper survivor base of a certain scale, almost all of them could be found on the map. Small bases made up of bandits and robbers would not appear on the map. Of course, some of the more famous bandit lairs would be marked red to remind people to avoid these places to avoid getting hurt. What Xiao Qing needed to do was to find a well-reputed survivor base and rest there. Staying in the wild for a long time without fresh fruits, vegetables and other supplies, eating wild animals like barbecued meat all the time would be unbalanced. After all, it was a long way back. Xiao Qing stored some vegetables and fruits, but her space couldn't keep them fresh, and the quantity was limited. It was definitely not enough for them to get back to S City. Therefore, it was necessary to find a survivor base to rest and reorganize. Choosing a survivor base was also very important. First, they had to choose a survivor base with a good reputation. Secondly, if the survivor base was too far away from their route, it would be a waste of time. A small survivor base was not suitable for Xiao Qing and the others, because a small survivor base meant that they would have less supplies and less things to exchange. Xiao Qing was a very picky person when it came to living. She was used to giving good things to the people around her. Even in the apocalypse, she had to at least pick out all the things she needed. After looking at the map, Xiao Qing confirmed 2 or 3 targets, and then carefully selected them. She could make a decision on the way back. But the fact was that changes were beyond human control. Xiao Qing originally decided to go to a medium-sized survivor base. This survivor base had a good reputation, and the size was just right. It was very suitable for replenishing supplies. As soon as she made the decision, something happened. The situation was like this. Xiao Qing had distributed the fruits equally to everyone at noon, and the store was already empty. When she got into the car, she was still considering whether to speed up and go to the base first. Then, as the car was driving, a group of people appeared in front of them. Chapter 221. The specific situation was that there were a few young men and women in tattered clothes. They looked quite delicate, and behind them was a group of people dressed like dogs. The people at the front were leading dogs. The dogs were mutated and had long fangs. There was even saliva dripping from the fangs. Their gazes were very fierce. Among the young men and women, there was a young girl who looked to be about 15 or 16 years old. She seemed to have accidentally fallen down due to exhaustion. The other two girls were unwilling to leave her behind. They reached out to help her, but the people behind them let go. The ferocious-looking dogs pounced on them. Their actions were not an insult to their appearance. They were also very fierce. They bit the leg of one of the girls. The boys were also very loyal. They could have run away, but they turned around and helped the girl drive the dogs away. With this delay, the group of people was surrounded. Originally, Xiao Qin would not care about this kind of thing. He could not even protect himself in the apocalypse. How could he spare the energy to care about other people's business? However, what happened next deeply pierced Xiao Qin's bottom line. The group of people holding the dogs came up and held down the young men and women. They kicked and beat them while cursing, "A group of bitches, run again, run again. Not a single one of you, but you have the guts to refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Run again." The young men and women were probably ordinary people. After resisting for a while, they were beaten up even more severely. The boys immediately protected the girl under them and let the people beat and scold her. If it was just scolding and beating, it would have been fine. After the men vented their anger, one of them, who had buck teeth and yellowish front teeth, said, "These little bitches wasted so much of our time. 2 beatings is really going easy on them. Captain, why don't we do this? Since we're outside and no one can see, why don't we have a taste? The prettiest one will be yours, and we will divide the rest. It won't be in vain." As he said that, he rubbed his thighs and laughed. The man who was called captain touched his chin and said with a straight face, "These are all good goods. We should bring them back and give them to the base leader." However, he smiled and said, "Since everyone wants to try something new, and I'm not a pedantic person, there's a small forest up ahead. Let's go there." When he said this, those people began to understand and laughed lewdly. Those young men and women could not help but feel a little despair. They had escaped from the devil's claws with great difficulty, but now they had fallen back. 2 of the young men looked at each other, and a trace of ruthlessness appeared in their eyes. The 2 of them suddenly pounced on the 2 men in front of them from the left and right, and then shouted to the girls, "Run! Run separately! Run as many as you can!" The men didn't expect them to resist. They didn't pay attention and were pressed to the ground. Although the girls were weak, they knew what situation they were in now. They also knew that it wasn't time for them to be pretentious. They immediately ran away. The men flew into a rage out of humiliation. One of them extended his hand and threw out a wind blade, which directly pierced into the neck of the youth who had pounced on him. Blood splattered on his face. The youth was also ruthless. He opened his mouth and bit the youth's throat. Puff! Another stream of blood spurted out. After all, the physique of a paranormal was relatively strong. He couldn't bite off the man's neck, and he couldn't even break the man's throat. He could only break the man's throat, and that was why blood spurted out. After his neck was bitten, the paranormal was completely enraged. A dagger that looked like a wind blade appeared in his hand. Then, he grabbed the young man's neck and stabbed him in all directions. Chapter 222. Soon, dozens of holes appeared on the young man's body, and he was about to die. Another young man wanted to imitate him. Before he died, he was able to bite the flesh of his enemy, but before he could do anything, he was kicked away. The kick was so powerful that the young man flew 2 meters away, and then he spat out a mouthful of dark blood. Obviously, his internal organs had been injured. How could the girls outrun the dogs? Soon, Two of the girls were pounced on by the dogs. The dogs were smart enough to know that their owners needed the girls to keep their appearances intact, so they just held them down and didn't bite them. The other girl was luckier. She stumbled to the front of Xiao Qing's car. Seeing that the dogs were about to pounce on her, the girl shouted with a pale face, "Help!" Her voice was so mournful that even Xiao Qing couldn't bear to hear it. She didn't want to meddle in other people's business, but when she heard what happened, there was an unknown fire burning in her heart, burning very fiercely. Xiao Qing just gave a look, and Yan Qiue tacitly took action and directly crushed the mad dog. The scene was a little cruel. The ground was full of blood and flesh, and even the girl's clothes were covered. The girl sat on the ground, gasping for breath. She couldn't help but tear up. After all, she was still an underage girl. Even if she had experienced the apocalypse, her mentality wasn't strong enough to face these things head-on. After pausing for a moment, the girl immediately reacted. She crawled up, grabbed the car door, and begged with tears in her eyes, "Please save my friend, I beg of you." As she said, she seemed to be worried that Xiao Qing wouldn't help, so she knelt beside the car and kept kowtowing. She kowtowed very hard, and in a few moments, her forehead was broken. Xiao Qing was about the same age as her, and her heart couldn't help but soften. She looked at Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing didn't say anything, but just pulled the girl up, and then, threw Yi out. "Do you see those two dogs? If you win, I'll give you an extra meal tonight. If you lose, I'll cut off your carrots for a week." Xiao Qing ignored Yi's resentful gaze and threw it out. Yi's level was higher than those mutated dogs, but that didn't change the fact that it was a rabbit. Yi moved its lips and prepared to make a fierce expression to scare the two dogs. Before it could make a ferocious expression, the two dogs looked at it fiercely. "Yi, mommy QAQ, so scary." Xiao Qing leaned against the window and said leisurely, "A week's worth of radishes." Then Yi rushed out without a word. It knew very well that its master's mommy meant what she said. If she wanted to cut off its radishes for a week, she wouldn't cut them off for 6 days and 33 hours. If it couldn't do what Xiao Qing said, it would probably really be cut off from its food. Yi's only obsession in this life was its radishes. Whoever wanted to snatch its radishes was asking for its life. Hence, Yi bared its rabbit teeth and rushed forward like a rabid dog. Oh, it was a rabid rabbit, and it jumped onto the back of one of the dogs. After it jumped onto the dog, Yi started to scratch and scratch. It even bit the dog's ear and refused to let go. Just looking at its expression, it was exceptionally fierce. The dog was stunned, probably because it had never seen such a fierce rabbit in its life. It was stunned for a moment, then it let go of the girl and started to roll on the ground. The dog and the rabbit were fighting like hooligans, rolling on the ground. No matter what, Yi was still a level 3 mutated animal. Compared to this level 1 mutated dog, its level was much higher. Even if Yi's attack power was low, it could still crush this dog just by looking at its energy. Chapter 223. However, Yi didn't know how to use it. It was only when it became ferocious that it bit off the dog's throat. After the ferocious Yi bit one dog to death, it turned around and pounced on the other dog. This time, it was much more experienced. It went up and scratched the dog's eyes. Its sharp claws directly poked the dog's eyes blind. In the end, both dogs were killed by the rabbit. The ability users who came 2 steps later looked at Yi and were stunned. One of them subconsciously said, "Yi, this rabbit has rabies, right?" They had never seen such a ferocious rabbit that could bite 2 dogs to death in one go. Looking at that wild single ear, then looking at those red eyes, and a pair of front teeth, it glared at them with a particularly ferocious expression. It was as if it would pounce on them and bite them as soon as someone gave the order. Xiao Qing was very satisfied. If it couldn't even handle 2 level 1 mutated dogs, then needless to say, it would be better to roast it and eat it. Fortunately, Yiya's performance was not bad. She stuck her head out and shouted, "Yiya, come back." Yiya immediately ran back and burrowed its head into Little Bun's arms. Then, Xiaoqing grabbed its only ear and lifted it up. It had just bitten a dog, so how could it burrow into Little Bun's arms? No matter what, it had to brush its teeth first. Yiya was a little dumbfounded. Then, Little Bun took it over to brush its teeth. Recently, Little Bun had been very fond of brushing Yiya's teeth. Every time it brushed its two big teeth, it would be especially bright. This time was no exception. Just as Little Bun was brushing Yiya's teeth, those people walked over. After they recovered from their shock, only anger was left. The buck-toothed man said angrily, "What are you doing? What are you doing? You didn't take good care of your rabbit and let it out to bite people. He bit our dogs to death. Are you deliberately provoking us?" Xiaoqing stroked Yiya's rabbit ear and said lazily, "Which eye of yours saw our rabbit go out to bite people? You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want." Something seems to be wrong. Buckteeth was furious. It had always been them acting shamelessly in front of others, and this was the first time they had met someone who dared to act shamelessly in front of them. Buckteeth was so angry that he laughed. He pointed at the rabbit in Little Bun's arms. "Do you think we're blind? Or do you think we're easy to bully? I'm telling you, this isn't over." The captain glanced at the young man protected by Xiao Tong, reached out to stop Buckteeth, and said, "Do you know what kind of people die the fastest? Busybody." He finally understood that Xiaoqing was prepared to protect these people and oppose them. Her attitude was very clear. She wanted to save these young men and women. Xiaoqing was still lazy. She tilted her head slightly and said with a smile, "There's another kind of people who die faster, and that's people with cheap mouths. There's a saying that trouble comes from the mouth, do you know? You motherfucker." Buckteeth was halfway through his swearing when a bright red handprint appeared on his face. He was hit and spun in a circle, but no one saw how Xiaoqing did it. "Even though I don't know who my mother is, the last thing I want to hear is someone scold me." Xiaoqing pushed open the car door, flipped her hair, and stood next to the girl. "If you have the ability, you can say that again. I said, fuck you." Before he could say the last word, another red handprint appeared on the other side of Buckteeth's face, so he spun in a counterclockwise circle. If the first slap could be said to be because they were caught off guard, then they were unable to see it clearly. However, this time around, no one was able to clearly see how Xiaoqing did it. Buckteeth's face was swollen in an instant, and his head buzzed like a swarm of bees. The captain's face immediately turned ugly. He said with a gloomy face, "Your Excellency is not giving face to our survival base. First, face isn't given by others, it's earned by oneself. Second, what's Shulin? I've never heard of it. Why should I give you face?" Xiaoqing said with a chuckle. Her gaze was very cold. It was the kind of bone-chilling coldness. Xiaoqing saw everything, including what they wanted to do to the girls, including the heavy blows they had dealt to the two young men. Obviously, it wasn't the first time they had done something like this. This kind of people, no, this kind of scum, living was a waste of air. It was better to send them to worship God. Xiaoqing already had the intention to kill, but Yan Qiue wanted to kill even more. Buckteeth was not convinced. He still wanted to say something, but his head suddenly spun in a circle on his neck, and then fell to the ground like a ripe fruit. Yan Qiue leaned on Xiaoqing with a frightened expression, and then said, "Oh, I didn't use much strength." How could he, so scary, Qing, I'm scared. Xiaoqing felt goosebumps all over her body when she heard that last syllable. She really wanted to stuff Yan Qiue back into the car. The paranormals couldn't bear it any longer, especially when they saw the headless corpse suddenly spurt out a large amount of blood like a fountain, sprinkling all over the ground. Then, the corpse fell down with a loud bang. The head rolled around on the ground and was stained with its own blood, making it look even more ferocious. They were all people who killed without blinking, but when the dead person became one of their own, they felt fear in their hearts. They killed people like killing chickens, and then retribution came. They were killed by others like dogs. Chapter 224. What scared them even more was that Brother Buckteeth, who was already at the peak of level 2, had died so mysteriously that they didn't even see how the other party had attacked. If Buckteeth had died in a fight with the other party, they could at least figure out the other party's strength. However, Buckteeth had died just like that without even causing a splash. They couldn't help but feel a little horrified. Either the other party had some special means, or their strength was far above Buckteeth's. No matter which possibility it was, it showed that Xiaoqing and the others weren't to be trifled with. Thinking of this, these people retreated. They were cold-hearted people. Even if they looked at Buckteeth's body on the ground, they didn't have any thoughts of avenging him. The group looked at each other. Then the captain immediately said, "I think this is all a misunderstanding. Misunderstandings can be resolved. Why do we have to fight each other and make everyone unhappy?" "Oh." Xiaoqing chuckled and then said, "So it's a misunderstanding." Her voice was very low and sounded a little dangerous. The captain's expression turned cold. He actually decisively threw out something that looked like a grenade and then turned to run. The grenade-like thing exploded after it landed on the ground. White smoke spread out from it and choked people until they couldn't help but tear up. It turned out that it wasn't a grenade, but a tear gas bomb. This captain was quite a character. He was quite decisive in his actions. Xiaoqing accidentally fell for it. Although she wouldn't cry, she still felt quite uncomfortable. Xiaoqing waved her hand and fanned away the irritating gas. Then she released a qiantang. When the qiantang was fighting, its fragrance could cause the other party to lose the ability to resist. It could also stimulate the fighting power of her teammates. Of course, it also had a function of dispersing other bad gases. As soon as the qiantang was released, the others felt a faint fragrance replace the smell of the tear gas bomb. However, at this time, those people had already escaped. The girl next to her immediately stepped forward and helped the other two girls up. The three of them ran over to the two young men. One of them was already on the verge of death, while the other was heavily injured, but not dead. The three girls immediately burst into tears. The five of them had escaped together. These two boys had always taken special care of the three of them, just like big brothers. Now, in order to let them escape, these two competent older brothers had actually, Xiaoqing walked over. She only needed a glance to see that the young man with bloody holes all over his body was beyond saving. His injuries were too severe. Even if Hua Tuo was still alive, he would not be able to save his life. On the other hand, although the other young man's internal organs were injured, he only needed to rest for a while to recover. The young man himself also knew that he was just experiencing terminal lucidity. He tightly grasped the hand of one of the girls and gasped for breath. "Ah Chi, in the future, find a reliable man to marry." "I'll be relieved," the girl named Ah Chi burst into tears. Her tears flowed all over the ground. She lowered her voice and said, "Little Liang, I won't marry. I won't marry. I'll be a widow for you for the rest of my life." The man's eyes were very gentle, but they were getting dimmer and dimmer. He had no time. With such a serious injury, he could only drag it on until now because of his obsession. Now that he saw that Ah Chi was out of danger, he breathed a sigh of relief and his vitality gradually faded away. If you meet a boy who is willing to give up everything for you, marry him. Chapter 225. The man didn't close his eyes until he died. He looked at Ah Chi longingly, full of reluctance and nostalgia, which made people feel sad. Ah Chi threw herself on his body. Her cries were heart-wrenching. Xiaoqing didn't know how to comfort her, so she took out some medicine to treat the other boy. Yan Qiue took out a cup from the car and poured water for the boy. The others also helped. The girl cried for a long time, and her eyes were swollen, but the man was dead. No matter how much she cried, it couldn't change the fact. The girl named Qi was quite strong. She solemnly thanked Xiaoqing, borrowed a shovel, and dug a deep hole on the side of the road to bury the man. In fact, she wanted to take him back to their hometown and bury him in the most familiar place. But in this era, she couldn't even protect herself. The only thing she could do was to bury him. At least the body wouldn't be destroyed by zombies or beasts. Xiaoqing watched the girl build a small grave with soil little by little, and his heart was full of mixed feelings. After burying the men, Xiaoqing got the complete story from them. The girl's name was Qi. The 5 of them had been captured by hunters and brought to the survival base in the vertical forest. Then, they would be sold as goods to superpowered people or people with money and power. They would become playthings. There were 2 kinds of hunters. One was the zombie hunters. They hunted high-level zombies and then sold their nuclei. They didn't join paranormals or mercenary groups. They were a maverick profession. The other type of hunter, on the other hand, hunted ordinary people. This type of hunter was like a human trafficker. They would go around capturing ordinary people with delicate looks and then sell them as playthings for others. Qi and the others were refugees. They didn't have any foundation or support, so they were targeted. After being caught, they didn't despair. Instead, they tried to escape. As a result, Xiaoqing witnessed the whole process. The vertical forest survival base wasn't large, but it wasn't small either. What was more coincidental was that the vertical forest survival base was near the one selected by Xiaoqing. The leader of the vertical forest survival base used to be a rapist. After the apocalypse, the whole country's system collapsed. Naturally, no one pursued the criminal. He just awakened his superpower, so he gathered a group of paranormals who were in prison with him at that time and later awakened their superpowers and established the vertical forest survival base. On the surface, the vertical forest survival base wasn't large, but it was a very formal survival base. In fact, it had been doing some black-hearted activities, such as human trafficking. After catching ordinary people with delicate looks, they would train the most outstanding ones and then sell them to high-level paranormals or dignitaries at a high price. Generally, they would sell the ordinary people or use them in the base. The base had always been doing this kind of business. Because the higher-ups of the base were all criminals, they didn't have any moral values. On the contrary, because of the apocalypse, they became more and more rampant. However, the leader of the base was very good at dealing with people. He sent resources or beauties to the higher-ups of the nearby bases. No matter when, the fact that people were soft-spoken and soft-spoken would never change. Therefore, the vertical forest survival base was still safe and sound. Therefore, a lot of people were victims. Not only girls, but boys who were more outstanding would also end up in the same situation. After all, there were always some people who liked to try new things. There were also some people who were interested in boys. There were also some female paranormals who had such needs. Chapter 226. Gu Panpan and the others gritted their teeth. They did not expect that in the apocalypse, there were still survivor bases that openly sold human beings. How many poor people were victims? We should have killed them directly. That would have relieved my hatred. Gu Panpan pouted and said, I was careless and let them escape. What a pity. Then we will go to the forest. Xiaoqing said decisively. Anyway, they had to choose a survivor base and then stop to rest. They could go to the vertical forest to see the situation. Anyway, the few places Xiaoqing had chosen were all near the vertical forest. If they could not solve the problem of the forest, they could go to other survivor bases to replenish their supplies. After making the decision, Xiao Qing said to the girls, "From here to the north, there are a few survivor bases with good reputations. Your companions are injured, so you can go there to settle down." Her meaning was very clear. Although she saved these people, she didn't intend to bring them along with her. These people understood this very well, so they made a prompt decision and said, "We have no way to repay you for saving our lives. If there's an opportunity in the future, we hope that we'll be able to help you. But please be careful, the base chief of Lilin is already at rank 4. Xiao Qing did not say much. She just gave them a few crystals. At least it was enough for them to maintain their lives in the new base until their lives were on the right track. This was the only thing Xiao Qing could do to help them. Xiao Qing wasn't a saint who would help everyone, but sometimes, it wasn't a bad thing to help others as long as it was within her power. At least, she could feel at ease. Everyone was struggling to survive in the apocalypse, so there was no need to be so cruel. After watching them leave, Xiao Qing decisively ordered the driver to go to the forest. Such a dirty place really aroused Xiao Qing's curiosity. She wanted to see and destroy it. If she could do it. How to say it, it was everyone's responsibility to clean up the trash. The vertical forest was not far from where they were. Before the sun had even set in the afternoon, Xiao Qing and the others had already reached the vertical forest. Normally, very few people would come to Shilin's survivor base. Firstly, it was located in a remote area. Secondly, the local survivors knew a thing or two about this base. Naturally, they wouldn't go to the thieves' den. In contrast, the inspection in the forest was relatively simple. As long as they could prove that they were paranormals, they did not need to check their bodies and could directly enter the base. Except for Fu Jingma, they were all paranormals, so Fu Jingma only needed to observe for a night. The others could directly enter the base. Fu Jingma stayed to observe. After the others entered the base, they rented an empty house. The atmosphere in the forest base was very strange. For example, at night, there was no one in the base could be said to be in the forest. Occasionally, a few people from the inspection team would pass by. Xiao Qing paid the money and got a key. Then, she followed the guidance of the base personnel and found the house they were going to live in temporarily. The group of people temporarily lived in the forest. Because of the limited room, Xiao Qing lived with Little Bun and Air Dai, which directly prevented the opportunity for Yan Qiue and Air Dai to climb on the bed. The two of them rarely behaved for a while. After settling down, Xiao Qing went out for a walk. She went out for a walk, not because she was too relaxed, but because she wanted to observe the location of the base. If there was a conflict in the base, how to leave. She also wanted to know if this base was really as evil as Ah Qi said. Chapter 227. That face was exactly the same as Air Dai's, but Xiao Qing would never mistake it for someone else. Fu Jingma, the coldness in Xiao Qing's eyes exploded like a blizzard. She kicked Fu Jingma, who was about to speak, out of the room. Get lost. Even so, she was merciful because Fu Jingma was Air Dai's older brother. If it were someone else, they would have been torn apart by now. Fu Jingma's entire body hit the door frame and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He was a little weak and there was a hint of sadness on his face. Why? Why can he do it but I can't? How am I inferior to him? Get lost. At that moment, the corners of Xiao Qing's eyes turned red. She flung her sleeves and shut Fu Jingma out of the room. She was afraid that if she looked at Fu Jingma again, she would not be able to control herself and kill him. Because of Dumbo, Xiao Qing endured it, even if the grief and indignation in her heart was like lava, gushing out and burning her internal organs to the point of pain. What kind of person did Fu Jingma take her for? A slut? Or a prostitute? Xiao Qing's emotions were fluctuating so violently that the objects near her had cracks all over them due to the force released from her body. Even the door was the same. Fu Jingma sat outside the door expressionlessly. After a while, he lowered his head. His eyes were dark and unreadable. After a long time, he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and left. Fu Jingma would often recall the time when he was very young. His mother would hold his hand as they walked into the luxurious house. Fu Jingshan would stand at the top of the stairs, his gaze cold and gloomy. His mother would stroke his head and ask him to call him brother. Then, Fu Jingshan would throw a toy car down and hit him on the head. Fu Jingma was jealous. What right did Fu Jingshan have to have everything he wanted? Why was it that he could only be an illegitimate child who couldn't see the light of day, standing behind the scenes and watching how Fu Jingshan didn't cherish what he had? Those things that Fu Jingshan did not want were things that he could not get. This was true in the past, and it was true now. Even if Fu Jingshan had become a monster, a fool, he was still able to easily obtain what he wanted but couldn't. What Fu Jingshan got, he could not get even if he was shameless. Xiao Qing sat in the room for a long time before she slowly calmed down. After calming down, the first thing she did was to take all the pillows and blankets out of the bed and burn them all. The flame was a warm orange, and soon the pile of things was burned to ashes. Xiao Qing took out a few new quilts and laid them out, then went to the bathroom. The moment she thought about how Fu Jingma had bathed in this bathroom, she felt uncomfortable all over. She scrubbed the entire bathroom and soaked in the bathtub for the entire afternoon. After scrubbing off a layer of her skin, she walked out as if nothing had happened. When Xiao Qing went out, Fu Jingma was sitting by the table. His gentle gaze carried a hint of sadness. He said softly, "I cooked some porridge." Xiao Qing acted as if she didn't see him and walked out without stopping. When she passed by Fu Jingma, she clenched her fists, afraid that she wouldn't be able to control herself and would attack Fu Jingma. Xiao Qing originally wanted to go out and continue scouting to see if she could gather more information, but she was in a bad mood. Sometimes, as she walked, she would think of the sticky feeling when Fu Jingshan kissed her toes. Then, she would have the urge to vomit. More than that, she had the urge to kill someone. However, Xiao Qing did not want to look at Fu Jingma anymore. Thus, she walked outside until it was almost dark before she went back. When she went back, Gu Panpan and the rest had already returned and bought some things. Chapter 228. She leaned against the railing and said, "After I find the evidence, I'll organize this matter and report it to the capital. Then, I'll send Fu Jingma away. We'll talk about it again when Dai remembers." Although Yan Qiue didn't know what had happened, he was very supportive of sending Fu Jingma away. It would be best if he was the only man left by Xiao Qing's side. "I think that's fine. But, did he do something to make you angry?" Yan Qiue asked tentatively. Xiao Qing's expression immediately turned ugly. What Fu Jingma had done really made her feel disgusted. Looking at Xiao Qing's expression, Yan Qiue guessed a lot. He was a smart person and was very familiar with Xiao Qing. Putting the two together, he could more or less guess what had happened. Yan Qiue's gaze turned cold as he said, "Did he come to look for you when we weren't around today?" Xiao Qing didn't say anything, but her expression turned even colder. Yan Qiue had already guessed most of what had happened. He laughed coldly and said, "I knew that guy wasn't a good person. He's so scheming and scheming. As expected, his foxtail has been exposed. He dares to have such thoughts. It's better to send him away as soon as possible." No wonder he didn't like Fu Jingma from the first time they met. Not only did Fu Jingma have feelings for Xiao Qing, but he was also shameless. "Ah Qing, did he do something to you?" Yan Qiue leaned forward. Although he was asking, his thin red lips directly pressed against Xiao Qing's earlobe. The temperature was too hot. Xiao Qing turned her head away uncomfortably and said, "Why are you leaning so close?" Yan Qiuyue lowered his voice and said, Qing, you don't like it? I can get even closer." Then he was slapped by Xiao Qing. Yan Qiuyue was speechless. The ambiguous atmosphere that he had worked so hard to create was gone just like that. Yan Qiuyue was indignant. He was so close. He kissed her. Then he didn't have a chance because Air Dai came out of the shower. As long as Air Dai was around, Yan Qiuyue could forget about getting close to Xiao Qing, let alone doing anything to Xiao Qing. Yan Qiuyue had considered it many times. Air Dai was his biggest competitor. Although Xiao Qing had always treated Air Dai as family, he couldn't resist the temptation of being closer to her. Air had a special place in Yan Qiuyue's heart. If he wanted to surpass Air Dai's place in Xiao Qing's heart places. This was a piece of news that made Yan Qiuyue crazy with jealousy, but he had no choice but to accept it. Fortunately, Air Dai's intelligence was like that of a child's, so even when they fought, Air Dai's methods were like that of a child's. To Yan Qiuyue, he still had the advantage. After giving up on getting close to Xiao Qing, Yan Qiuyue quickly occupied one side of the bed. Air Dai also quickly occupied the other side. When Xiao Qing came back from the balcony, she saw two good-looking men lying on the bed, one on the left and one on the right, looking at her lovingly. So corrupt, it felt like an ancient king sleeping with his concubine, and it was a threesome. Xiao Qing silently complained about herself. Then she crawled under the blanket. The two men skillfully wrapped themselves around her. Sleeping together under the blanket was indeed corrupt. Before falling asleep, Xiao Qing kept thinking about how she had no dignity. She couldn't help but soften after being wrapped around by two pieces of sticky candy. She should have thrown them out. Otherwise, how could she? Air Dai was still young and liked to crawl under her blanket. However, Yan Qiuyue was shameless and thick-skinned. She definitely couldn't tolerate him. The next night, when the two of them crawled under her blanket, Xiao Qing's heart softened again. She silently said to herself that she would tolerate them one more time. Chapter 229. Although it was like this every day. On the third day of entering the base, trouble finally came to the door. Xiao Qing had been wandering outside, collecting information and looking for evidence. The few paranormals who had run away from her were all recovering from their injuries. One of them went out to buy things and happened to see Xiao Qing. As soon as he saw Xiao Qing, he was scared and immediately reported it to his captain. The captain thought about it and felt something was wrong. Xiao Qing clearly had a grudge with them, and knew that they came from the base. Why would she walk into a trap? Anyone with a little brain wouldn't do that, right? So the captain thought of a conspiracy. The more he thought about it, the more flustered he became. It was probably a guilty conscience. After he panicked, he reported it to his boss, the base chief, Han Lilin. After Han Lilin heard it, he also felt something was wrong. According to the captain, Xiao Qing should be a very smart person. Why would she walk into a trap? Unless she had a trump card to ensure that she could safely leave under the siege of the entire base, as long as she had a little brain, she wouldn't walk into the home of her enemy. Han Lilin asked his subordinates again, and the conclusion he got was that Xiao Qing had been wandering around recently. Although she seemed to be aimless, she had been approaching the place where they kept the slaves. Clearly, she had an ulterior motive. Han Lilin felt that Xiao Qing definitely had a trump card, so he couldn't go head-on with her. After thinking about it again and again, he called his subordinates to change the prey they caught to a safe place to lock them up. This was the opportunity that Xiao Qing had been waiting for. Her boldness had not been in vain. She had managed to scare a big guy out of the crowd. The number of boys and girls who were caught by Han Lilin's subordinates was really too many. When he moved them, he made a lot of noise. If Xiao Qing didn't notice it, it would be strange. This time, she didn't go out openly, but secretly rushed over to collect some evidence. The prey was driven out of one prison after another and transported out of the base. There should be another secret base outside the forest base. Xiao Qing secretly observed. Most of the youths and girls had suffered a certain amount of hardship. Some of them were emaciated, some wore ragged clothes, and some had a faint smell of blood on them. Obviously, they had been injured. Most of them were not allowed to eat until they were full. This way, they would not have enough strength, and the possibility of escaping would be smaller. Most of the young boys and girls here were young, and there were also some slightly older women mixed in. However, most of them were in their 20s. What made Xiao Qing even angrier was that some of them were clearly children. The youngest one looked to be around 11 or 12 years old. There were also some who were around 14 or 15 years old. The oldest was no more than 16 years old. These people were also crazy. They didn't even let children go. Xiao Qing quietly followed them. She saw that they sent the people to another secret base. This base was hidden in the mountains. It was probably one of Han Lilin's 3 burrows. Xiao Qing waited at the door for a long time. After a while, those guards came out one after another. They even carried out a few gunny sacks. In the past, Xiao Qing had seen that every afternoon, there would be guards carrying out a few gunny sacks. It was only today that Xiao Qing knew what was inside. It was all corpses. Because when one of the guards was carrying the gunny sack, he accidentally let go of his hand. From the gunny sack, a snow-white arm with bruises and a face fixed on pain and despair was revealed. It looked to be a 17 or 18-year-old little girl. The parts that were revealed were all injuries. At that moment, Xiao Qing almost couldn't resist the urge to attack. How evil and inhumane was this to do such a thing? Xiao Qing followed the guards all the way to a forest. There was a big pit in the forest, and flies were flying around the pit. The guards came to the side of the pit, opened the sack, and threw out the corpses inside. Then, they couldn't stand the strong stench, covered their noses, and ran away. After they all left, Xiao Qing walked over. The pit was full of corpses. Some of them had already rotted to the point where only the bones were left. Some of them were still fresh. The same thing was that all the corpses had flies flying above them. These flies landed on the flesh and ate greedily. There were also maggots constantly wriggling on the rotting corpses. Those whose faces could still be seen were all young boys and girls. Without exception, they were all covered with scars. At a glance, it was obvious that they were tortured to death. Xiao Qing's accumulated anger had reached its peak. She knew that people's hearts were sinister. In this post-apocalyptic world, morality and law couldn't restrain some people. They would do some excessive things. However, Xiao Qing didn't think that this excessive thing would be so cruel. Looking at those dead boys and girls, they were already piled up at the bottom of the pit. Moreover, there were more boys and girls being sold as goods. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. This group of scoundrels, beasts, even if they lived in the 18 levels of purgatory, it wouldn't be enough to redeem their sins. Xiao Qing really wanted to bury them, but she also knew that now wasn't the time to act rashly. If because of this, they would alert the enemy and cause all their efforts to be in vain, then the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. She gritted her teeth and took pictures of the miserable scene in the pit. In the post-apocalyptic world, there was no signal on the phone. It was definitely impossible to make a call. However, basic functions like taking pictures were still usable. She took a few pictures before preparing to leave the place and go back the way she came. Han Lilin must have obtained a lot of benefits from selling human beings. If she could find his account book, then she could find all the culprits. However, the difficulty of this wasn't ordinary. Especially for Xiao Qing, it was very difficult for her to find such confidential information from Han Lilin. Just as Xiao Qing was about to leave, a pale hand stretched out from the pit. Chapter 230. If an ordinary person saw this scene, they would probably be scared out of their wits. However, Xiaoqing was very calm. She stopped and turned around to see a pale and bloodless hand grabbing the edge of the crater. Blue veins popped out, and after a while, a head stretched out. It was a young boy, at most 17 or 18 years old. His forehead and the tip of his nose were covered in fine beads of sweat, mixed with mud and blood. He was in a very sorry state. His upper body was hanging out of the pit, gasping for breath. He wanted to save some strength and climb out. But in front of him, a pair of white sneakers appeared. The boy was shocked. He risked his life to escape from hell. Was he going to enter the wolf's den again? The boy looked up and saw Xiaoqing's cold eyes. He was relieved. At least he didn't see Xiaoqing in the forest base. "Miss, can you do me a favor and send me to the Kyoto survivor base?" The boy said embarrassedly. I can't give you a good reward, you escaped from the vertical forest. I'll ask you a few questions. If you answer honestly, I'll send you to the Kyoto survivor base. Xiaoqing didn't care about the boy's dirty body. She pulled him out of the pit. This place was too dangerous for communication. Xiaoqing took the boy deep into the forest where they wouldn't be easily found. Then she put the boy on the ground. "How much do you know about the dirty trade in the forest base?" The boy hesitated for a moment. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said to Xiaoqing, "I came from the south. I have relatives in the Kyoto survivor base. I was going to seek shelter with them, but I was caught by the hunters in the forest on my way here. I don't know much about the others. There were about 50 victims who were locked up with me. They were all in their teens or 20s. Not long ago, 20 girls were taken away. I don't know if they are alive or dead. This time, I plan to escape for a long time. Today, someone wanted to rape a young girl. I took the opportunity to stop them, and sure enough, I was beaten. Originally, I was going to pretend to be dead, but they suddenly got some news and wanted to take everyone away. In the chaos, I got into the sack and pretended to be a corpse." The boy carefully thought about it and told her everything he knew. With his own strength, it would be difficult to safely reach the Kyoto survivor base and find help to save those poor people. If Xiaoqing had bad intentions, then he could only blame himself for being blind. If Xiaoqing could fulfill her promise and take him to the Kyoto survivor base, then those poor people would have a better chance to be saved. He could only take a gamble. Anyway, his life was in the hands of Xiaoqing. He had no other choice. Those guards changed shifts 4 times a day. They changed shifts at noon, 6 in the afternoon, 12 in the evening, and 6 in the morning. Usually, the guards are very strict. The boy said in detail. "Many of those who were caught with me have died. Many were taken away. Now, there are not many left. After me, many more young girls were brought in. Among them, there were a few who were outstanding, but they were taken away by Han Lilin and the other higher-ups. I'm afraid," when he finished, Xiaoqing's eyes lit up. She lowered her voice and asked, "Do you have a way to contact the girls around Han Lilin?" That account book could not be obtained by others, but if it was Han Lilin's lover, there was a great chance to get it. The boy hesitated, then gritted his teeth and said, "After asking me so many questions, can you tell me what you want to do?" Chapter 231. Xiaoqing didn't mind the young man's suspicions. She just told him what she had encountered before and expressed her thoughts. Finally, she said, "If we get the account book, the evidence will be more sufficient. Moreover, we can also catch those who have dealings with Han Lilin in one fell swoop. So if you have a way to contact them, please be sure to tell me." The teenager thought for a long time, and then said, "I can contact one of them. Her name is Xie Chunyan. We were caught together, and we have a good relationship. With her personality, I'm sure she'll be willing to help us. Xiao Qing nodded, and then said, it's not convenient for you to appear in the base openly. Tell me how to contact her, and then give me evidence that she can believe. I'll send someone to send you to the capital. We'll work together. The teenager told Xiao Qing how to contact Xie Chunyan. After the discussion, Xiao Qing took out a new set of clothes for the teenager to change into, and then she went back to find Yan Hanqing in Guchuan. Yan Hanqing was a very reliable person, and Gu Chuan, although indifferent and quiet, was also very reliable. Xiao Qing told the two of them about the situation, and then entrusted the teenager to them. From here to the capital, it was a few days' journey. Yan Hanqing and Gu Chuan cooperated. As long as there were no accidents, it would be easy to send the teenager back. After Yan Hanqing and Gu Chuan left, the first thing Xiao Qing did was to contact Xie Chunyan. Although Xie Chunyan was caught, she was very beautiful. Han Lilin loved her very much, so he gave her a certain amount of freedom, allowing her to walk around the base when she was free. Of course, she was only allowed to walk around when there was someone watching her. However, Han Lilin didn't let her come in contact with the teenager. The only thing she could do was to ask someone to send the teenager some medicine. On this day, after Xie Chunyan had dinner, she prepared to take a walk outside. Not far behind her, there were two bodyguards, who were actually monitoring her. Xie Chunyan was very upset. No matter who it was, being held captive would not be in a good mood. The reason why she often walked around this area was because there was a field of flowers planted here. Although they were all small flowers with single petals, when they were connected together, they were also very beautiful. It could always relieve her agitated mood. She walked around the flowers and sat on a bench in the middle of the sea of flowers. As soon as she sat down, her butt was poked. She reached out and touched it. It was a paper ball. Xie Chunyan was a cautious person. She quietly picked up the paper ball and unfolded it when the two bodyguards weren't looking at her. After reading the words on it, Xie Chunyan walked to the toilet. When the two bodyguards were about to follow her, they heard Xie Chunyan say, "Do you want to follow me to the toilet?" Her eyebrows were charming, but at this moment, there was a little fierceness in them. The two bodyguards shrank their heads. Although they wanted to say something, they did not dare to offend Xie Chunyan. After all, pillow talk was very scary. Besides, Xie Chunyan was an ordinary person without superpowers. She was also a delicate girl. Where could she go? Xie Chunyan went to the toilet alone and then saw Xiao Qing, who had been waiting for a long time. Although this place was dirty, it was the only place where the two of them could meet without being suspected. Xie Chunyan looked at Xiao Qing vigilantly. "Who are you? Why did you call me here in such a way? What do you want to do?" "I'm Qingguanyan's friend." Qingguanyan was the teenager who was sent to the capital. Xiao Qing's eyebrows softened, and then she said, "I have something to ask you for help." Chapter 232. What's the matter? Xie Chunyan let down her guard a little, but still looked at Xiao Qing vigilantly. Xiao Qing said, "Here's the thing. I want to bring down Han Lilin and save those innocent boys and girls, so I hope you can help me take the account book away from Han Lilin." Xie Chunyan immediately became more vigilant. She pursed her lips and said, "I don't know Qingguanyan, and I don't know what you're talking about. You should go. I'll pretend I didn't hear anything." Xiao Qing also knew that if she made Xie Chunyan believe that she was Qingguanyan's friend and asked her to do such a dangerous thing, Xie Chunyan would definitely be suspicious. She didn't think that Xie Chunyan would believe her immediately. On the contrary, if Xie Chunyan believed her immediately, she would have to worry about whether it was a trap or not. She would have to worry about whether Xie Chunyan could do it. "I'm indeed Qingguanyan's friend. He asked me to thank you for the medicine. And the name Xie Chunxiao is very nice." Xiao Qing said so, and Xie Chunyan's eyebrows relaxed. If there were one or two people who knew that she sent medicine to Qing Guanyin, then she only mentioned the name Xie Chunxiao to Qing Guanyin. Where's Guanyin? Xie Chunyan was a little friendlier and asked. I went to investigate this matter today and happened to see the guards throwing the body away. Qing Guanyin faked his death to escape, so I met him. I've sent someone to escort him to the capital with some evidence. After all, it's not suitable for him to come back to Lilin. After Xiao Qing finished her explanation, she said, I hope you can help me get that account book and catch all the culprits in one fell swoop. Don't miss out on some of the more well-hidden ones who are still out there. Xie Chunyan thought for a long time and said, I'll find a chance to take out the account book these days. That bastard hid the account book very well. I can only try my best. Thank you. Xiao Qing said sincerely. Xie Chunyan shook her head, it's hard to say whether you'll succeed or not. I just hope you can save those poor girls and boys, and I hope you can kill that bastard Han Lilin. Of course. Xiao Qing handed a dagger to Xie Chunyan. It's for self-defense. If you encounter any unexpected accident, it's better than being empty-handed. Xie Chunyan took it. Before she left, she said, for the next few days, come here every day after 6:00 in the evening to take a look. If I get the account book, I will put it under the sink. You take the account book and leave quickly. Xiao Qing noted it down seriously. She watched Xie Chunyan leave and then left quietly. After Yan Hanqing left, she was the only one who knew how to cook. Xiao Qing went back and cooked several dishes. Fortunately, dinner was not too late. After dinner, everyone was supposed to go back to rest. Xiao Qing quietly called the few of them, except for Fu Jingmo, to her room. After calling everyone over, Xiao Qing briefly told them what had happened before and what she was going to do. After getting the account book, they were going to leave. However, if the account book was exposed, it would alert the enemy and cause Han Lilin to transfer them again. Xiao Qing originally wanted to forge a fake account book to see if she could buy some time. However, time did not allow her to do so. She did not have the time to do so. She had to think of another way. More importantly, Han Lilin was watching them now. It would not be easy to escape unscathed. After a general discussion, they went back to their rooms. The next afternoon, Xiao Qing went to take a look. The account book had not arrived yet. On the third afternoon, she went to take a look. On the sixth day, an account book appeared under the sink. Chapter 233. Xiao Qing hurriedly took the account book and prepared to let Er Dai and the others leave first. As for her, she couldn't leave. She had to take Xie Chunyan with her. Otherwise, Xie Chunyan would be the first to suffer if the account book was exposed. Xie Chunyan had risked her life to help them. How could Xiao Qing leave Xie Chunyan behind? Yan Qiue and the others were very clear about Xiao Qing's ability. They knew that if they stayed, they would only be a burden. Therefore, they left without any objections. As soon as they left, the people sent to keep an eye on them immediately sent the news back. Han Lilin first heaved a sigh of relief because Xiao Qing and the others were like a gun pointed at his heart. They didn't move away or shoot, which made him even more flustered. Now that Xiao Qing and the others left, he immediately felt relieved. However, soon, Han Lilin's face changed. There were two possibilities for Xiao Qing and the others to leave. The first possibility was that they had spent too much time and didn't find anything. Therefore, they didn't want to waste any more time and left. The second possibility was that they had already gotten what they wanted. Therefore, they left with satisfaction. Thinking of this, Han Lilin immediately sent people to check the place where those people were locked up to see if there were any problems. After the order was given, Han Lilin suddenly thought of another possibility. He hurriedly returned to the place where he lived. On the other side, Xiao Qing quietly found Han Lilin's place. Logically speaking, this place should be the most heavily guarded place. In fact, it wasn't. Usually, no one dared to provoke Han Lilin. In addition, Han Lilin was the top master in the base. Most of the masters in the base had been transferred to guard the goods. Therefore, the security here wasn't very tight. Xiao Qing spent a little more effort to sneak in. When Xiao Qing arrived, Xie Chunyan was reading a book. Her eyebrows were picturesque. No matter how you looked at her, she was a natural beauty. Unfortunately, since ancient times, beautiful women were often unlucky. She was born at the wrong time. Xiao Qing climbed into the room. She didn't have time to talk to Xie Chunyan. She just said, "Hurry up and leave with me. Han Lilin will soon know that the account book is missing." Xie Chunyan didn't want to leave. She put down the book and leaned her soft waist against the chair. Her eyes were full of tenderness. "I thank you for your kindness. But you can't leave with me. Let's go." Xiao Qing didn't say anything. She just stretched out a hand. And frowned. Xie Chunyan covered her face and laughed. Then she said, "I originally had a husband and a son. Now that my husband is dead, my son is also dead. I'm only alive for one breath. In fact, I want to see Han Lilin die with my own eyes. Unfortunately, I can't do it. You go and send the evidence away." Xiao Qing still wanted to say something, but the sound of footsteps suddenly sounded. It was getting closer and closer. She quickly hid herself. The hiding position was very clever. It was under the eaves. She clung to the top of the pillar. If someone didn't deliberately look up, they would never find her. Han Lilin came back in a hurry. He didn't even care about Xie Chunyan. He went to the place where he hid the account book. He opened the place where he hid the account book. He was shocked. The account book was gone. She knew where he hid the account book and could take it out to others. He didn't even need to guess. Only Xie Chunyan. Han Lilin's eyes were red. He grabbed Xie Chunyan's collar. He gritted his teeth and asked her, "Where's the thing? Who did you give it to?" Xie Chunyan didn't speak. She just smiled. The gentleness in her eyes was overflowing, but there was no warmth. Han Lilin wanted to strangle her at that time. He really liked Xie Chunyan. He liked her so much that he was willing to indulge her temper. He was willing to use a lot of things to please her. Before Doomsday, Han Lilin was a prisoner. He had 2 crimes. One was rape, and the other was murder. The person he killed was not someone else, but his wife. From this, it could be seen how crazy a person he was. However, ever since Han Lilin took Xie Chunyan by force, he was not willing to speak loudly to her. But Xie Chunyan betrayed him. This was a heavy blow to him. "Xie Chunyan. Don't think that I don't want to kill you." Han Lilin gnashed his teeth. Xie Chunyan's face was calm. Looking carefully, her heart was dead. The person she loved most was dead. Her husband and child were dead. There was no hope for her life. What was the difference between being alive and being dead? "If you want to kill me, do it." Han Lilin hated Xie Chunyan's calmness. He grabbed Xie Chunyan's neck and hardened his heart. In just a few seconds, Xie Chunyan's face had turned purple from his pinch. Xiao Qing couldn't take it anymore. She flipped into the room and kicked Han Lilin's shoulder with force. She was going to kick the back of Han Lilin's head. But when Han Lilin heard the sound of something breaking behind his head, he subconsciously tilted his head. As a result, the kick landed on his shoulder. It had to be said that intuition saved him. Xiao Qing's kick could definitely break his head. Han Lilin's shoulder made a cracking sound. It was like the sound of bones breaking. He loosened his grip and let go of Xie Chunyan. After one attack failed, Xiaoqing turned around and kicked again. This time, she kicked Han Lilin's back. He flew out like a dog eating feces. His chin hit the ground first. Xie Chunyan sat on the ground. She covered her chest and coughed. After a while, she said, "I told you to leave. Why did you come back?" Xiaoqing pulled her up and was about to take her away. Han Lilin stood up from the corner. He said with a ferocious face, "Don't even think about leaving." Before Han Lilin pounced, he first sounded the alarm. The ear-piercing alarm immediately rang throughout the base. Xiaoqing's eyes were cold. She was afraid that someone would come to support him soon. She had to end this quickly. Chapter 234. Although Han Lilin was caught off guard at the beginning, that was because he was not prepared. Han Lilin himself was quite strong. He gathered a group of prisoners and built a survivor base. The higher-ups in the base had no sense of morality, so robbing other people's crystal stones and digging up the crystal nuclei of their own kind was easy for them. With all kinds of despicable means, Han Lilin was now a level 4 paranormal. Although he was a level 4 paranormal and had a weak foundation, his means were vicious. In terms of fighting power, he was not inferior to other level 4 paranormal at all. Even though Xiaoqing's level was higher than his, it was still impossible for her to kill Han Lilin in a short period of time. As she fought with Han Lilin, she observed how she could escape. Of course, the key was to bring Xie Chunyan with her. There were faint footsteps outside. She was afraid that people who had heard the alarm came to help Han Lilin. If she kept fighting like this, Xiaoqing would be the one left. In terms of fighting power, Xiaoqing was very strong, but 2 fists could not fight against 4 hands, let alone hundreds of hands. Xie Chunyan saw the situation clearly. She knew that with Xiaoqing's character, she would never leave easily without saving her. She was a person who was determined to die. How could she be willing to implicate Xiaoqing? Xie Chunyan smiled and suddenly said, "Although I don't know your name, I still have to thank you for this matter. After you leave, when you see him, please help me tell him that if he meets my sister, please take care of her." Hearing Xie Chunyan's words, Xiaoqing felt like her last words. She slapped Han Lilin away and was ready to take Xie Chunyan away by force. Xie Chunyan had already taken out the dagger Xiaoqing gave her and cut her throat without any hesitation. She was a weak woman. Before the doomsday, she was doted on by her family and husband. After the doomsday, she lost everything overnight. This weak woman had to be strong. Today was the bravest thing she had ever done in her life. The hot blood spurted out from the wound and splashed on Xiaoqing's chest and clothes. Xiaoqing's eyes darkened. Xie Chunyan chose to end her life in order not to make things difficult for her. Because Xie Chunyan knew that if she took her along, even Xiaoqing might not be able to escape. Xiaoqing was a sentimental person. She would never leave her alone to escape. Xiaoqing clenched her teeth. She wanted to kill Han Lilin before leaving, but it was too late. A series of footsteps came from outside. She waved her hand, and a spatial rift appeared. Xiaoqing flashed and entered. When she came out, she was already in the small garden where she met Xie Chunyan. Xiaoqing's control of the spatial power was still not good. So far, her spatial rift could only travel a distance of 100 meters. Moreover, she could not bring anyone with her. If she brought someone with her, she was afraid that if she brought someone with her, there would only be a pile of minced meat left when she came out. After leaving, Xiaoqing did not immediately go to meet up with Air Dai and the others. Instead, she found a place with wind and planted the autumn flowers. The fragrance was carried by the wind. Soon, the whole survivor base would be filled with the fragrance. After doing all this, she left the base and met up with Air Dai and the others. The rendezvous point was in the woods outside the base. Dummy and the others were pacing back and forth impatiently. Only when Xiao Qing arrived did they breathe a sigh of relief. They all knew what Xiao Qing was going to do. However, when they saw Xiao Qing's expression and saw that she came back alone, they knew that Xiao Qing did not succeed. They did not know how to comfort her, but they also knew that Xiao Qing did not need to be comforted. The most important thing now was not to comfort her. Chapter 235. Right now, there are two possibilities. The first is that Han Lilin's humiliation turns into anger. He already knows that we took the account book, so it's very likely that he'll kill everyone to silence them. The second is that he can't bear to kill them all, so he'll transfer those who are more outstanding. No matter which choice it is, there will definitely be many people who will die. So we have to think of a way to save them. Xiao Qing sorted out her emotions and said very calmly. She calmly started to plan. Of course, we have too few people. If we go to save them, we will all die. So I think we should lure the guards here and let those who are willing to run away. As for those who are unwilling to leave, we can't do anything. The others nodded. At least they had tried their best. They couldn't do anything to those who were suspicious and didn't want to run away. Fu Jingma, you stay here and hide well. The rest of you, come with me. Xiao Qing handed a gun to Fu Jingma after she finished speaking. This gun was Yan Hunching's stock. Although it was a less lethal pistol, as long as Fu Jingma didn't run around, it should be enough to protect himself. Fu Jingma didn't say anything. He took the gun and found a place to hide. After Xiao Qing and the others prepared, they went directly to the secret base. Xiao Tang should be able to stop Han Lilin and the others for a while. During this time, Xiao Qing and the others would have a chance to save the people. Xiao Qing observed last time. There were two teams of guards, about 30 people, and their strength was between level 2 and level 3. Although Xiao Qing's team was small in number, they were all elites. If they operated properly, saving those people would be a piece of cake. After Xiao Qing and the others arrived at the secret base, they became careful. There were machine guns outside the base. There was a team patrolling outside, and another team patrolling inside. In general, the security was quite tight. Xiao Qing carried Little Bun on her back, and Little Bun carried Yaya on his back. The family of 3 squatted in the grass and observed. Xiao Tong covered them with a layer of spiritual shield. This shield could isolate the sense of breath. Whether it was mutant animals, zombies, or humans, even if they were close, they could not sense their breath. However, it could not block direct observation. After all, this was a protective shield and not an invisible shield, so they could still be seen with the naked eye. A group of people approached the base cautiously. Their time was limited, so they had to end the battle quickly. After they were infinitely close to the base, the first one to rush out was Damier. He jumped up and directly rushed into the crowd. What would happen if a zombie sneaked into a group of people? Those people must have panicked first. Although they were all paranormals and were not afraid of being infected, their nature still made them panic. Once the patrol team was in chaos, Gu Panpan and Yan Chiue surrounded them from both sides. Xiao Qing also released her vines. Only Xiao Qing followed Xiao Tong. Her task was to protect Xiao Qing and Little Bun, and control the overall situation. In short, Xiao Tong was like a brick. She would move wherever she was needed. In other words, she would use her spiritual power to fill the gap wherever it was needed. Don't show mercy. Just kill them. Xiao Qing said coldly. This group of people helped the tyrant and did such a wicked thing for Han Lilin. Even death could not wipe out their crimes. Besides, they must have killed a lot of people. The piles of bones in the pit could prove that. Therefore, there was no need to show mercy to them. Killing them was a good thing for the people. The others also understood this very well. None of them showed any mercy, especially Gu Panpan. Those who dared to confront her directly were all smashed into meat patties with a single slap of her hand. Chapter 236. She wasn't called King Kong Barbie for nothing. Strength paranormals were very powerful in the early days of the apocalypse. A strength paranormals could crush dozens of nature paranormals who could only throw small fireballs or water droplets. However, as the apocalypse progressed, paranormals leveled up one after another. Nature paranormals began to show their fangs, while strength paranormals became the weakest among the paranormals. Even if you have a lot of strength, it's useless. Nature ability users can easily block your attacks with an earth wall. Especially those long-range ability users, they just need to roll up their sleeves and stand there, constantly shooting fireballs and so on. They'll exhaust you to death. However, Gu Panpan was different. As long as the paranormals of the same level weren't as unpredictable as Xiaoqing, Yan Hanqing's ability was special, and Yan Qiue's ability was especially powerful, she could crush several of them. In her eyes, they were all brittle and easy to crush. Well, she was still the weakest among Xiaoqing's subordinates. However, when facing outsiders, Gu Panpan was very powerful. She would flatten those who didn't like her, crush those who dared to clamor, and kick those who didn't like her. Yan Qiue looked even more ferocious. Because of his ability, if he used too much strength, he would crush people directly. His flesh and blood splattered everywhere. He looked even more ferocious than Gu Panpan. In comparison, Xiaoqing was more gentle. She was in charge of tying those people up and then Dai would kill them. When she attacked, she used her spiritual power to cover the entire battlefield. That way, no sound or smell could be transmitted outside, and the people inside wouldn't know. After killing the patrol team, Dai and Gu Panpan dug out the paranormal's energy. Although their levels weren't high, and it was useless for Xiaoqing and the others, Dai and Little Bun could still use it. After disposing of the corpses, Xiaoqing and the others swaggered in. The second patrol team was leaning against the door or squatting on the ground, smoking. They laughed while smoking. Come on, let's place our bets. How long can they block old Dad? I think he can last 10 minutes at most. Another person laughed. You think too highly of this old man. I think he'll last 5 minutes at most. I don't think he can last 3 minutes. Someone immediately laughed. While they were laughing, they saw Xiaoqing and the others swagger in. They were very arrogant. One of them stood up and said, "Hey, what are you doing here? Old Lu and the others are lazy. Why did you let them in? We are here to collect a debt." Gu Panpan giggled. Her appearance was a bit strange. She was clearly a delicate and pretty young girl with a bit of baby fat on her face. Her chubby face was especially cute, but the muscles on her body were so swollen that they almost burst through her shirt. Collect a debt. Before the man could finish his words, Gu Panpan punched him in the head. Gu Panpan's fist landed on his face. He didn't even have time to scream before his head was smashed into the ground. His legs were still twitching. But with Gu Panpan's strength, he was afraid that he had already gone to pray to God. The others finally reacted. They shouted and rushed forward. Fireballs, wind blades, vines, and earth shields were all thrown at them. Gu Panpan took a step forward and struck a beautiful pose. Any ability that landed on her, no matter what it was, immediately dissipated. Not even a white mark was left behind. The only thing that didn't dissipate was a vine. The vine wrapped around Gu Panpan's arm. She waved her hand casually and broke the vine. Chapter 237. The boy was helpless. His leg was broken, and there was no medicine to treat it, so it was inflamed and suppurated. It was very painful to move. He couldn't even crawl out, let alone walk. The girl stopped talking and kept dragging the boy. She also wanted to drag the young woman, but no one moved. She had a high fever when she was a child. Later, she was treated in time, but her brain was still damaged, so her IQ was lower than that of ordinary children. She used to be loved by her family, but after Doomsday, her family was ruined, and she was also caught. It was the boy and the young woman who had been protecting her. In order to protect her, the boy broke one of his legs, and the young woman was in a state of high fever. Although she was stupid, she was sincere. How could she abandon them? Shao Qing commanded calmly, Pan Pan, you carry the big sister. Dai, you carry the boy. Then Shao Qing handed the little bun to Shao Tong, and picked up the little girl. Let's go. Let's go before they come. They all nodded, carried the people they should carry, and left. When they left, Han Lilin had already rushed over with his people. Shao Qing asked Shao Tong to open a spirit shield, and then left from the side with the people. There was a mountain close to the secret base, and Han Lilin would definitely send people to search around. What she needed to do was to hide until the reinforcements arrived in the capital. That would be enough. Although she had 3 burdens with her, as long as there was no accident, it would be no problem to hide until the reinforcements arrived in the capital. Shao Qing didn't say anything, and led the people up the mountain. It was the best place to hide on the mountain. Whether it was the complexity of the terrain or the obstacles of the road and trees, it was advantageous for Shao Qing and the others. Besides, there were many plants on the mountain. If something happened, it would be much easier for them to escape with Shao Qing, who was a wood paranormal. As soon as they went up the mountain, Shao Tong immediately spread her spirit power, and began to search along a straight line for the most suitable place to hide. After a few minutes, she determined a direction. Without hesitation, Shao Qing took her men and followed Shao Tong forward. The mountain road was extremely rugged. The few mutants were fine, but Fu Jingma couldn't keep up with their speed. Among the remaining people, only Yan Qiue didn't bring anyone. However, Yan Qiue knew Fu Jingma's feelings for Shao Qing. How could she be willing to carry him? Hence, Yan Qiue carried Fu Jingma and walked forward like a child. She grabbed Fu Jingma's belt and dragged him all the way up. When they reached a difficult place, she would change her position and use her arms to hold him. By the time they reached their destination, Fu Jingma's face was already as white as a sheet of paper. He almost vomited all over the ground. What appeared in front of them was a mountain wall. Vines grew on the mountain wall, covering it very tightly. When the vines were lifted, a dark cave entrance was revealed. This was the hiding place that Shao Tong had found. After they entered the cave, Shao Tong spread out her spirit power to cover the entrance of the cave. In this way, as long as the vines weren't lifted, no one would be able to find this place. The cave was quite shallow, but it was very dark. In order not to expose themselves, they didn't light any torches. They sat together, and the whole cave was very quiet. Shao Qing put down the girl on her back, took out a lantern grass, and stuck it on the mountain wall. It would take some time for Han Lilin's men to find this place. She could take advantage of this time to check on the injuries of these people. Among the 3 of them, the one with the heaviest injuries wasn't the young woman, nor was it the young girl. Instead, it was the young man with a broken leg. His leg was now twisted like a fried dough twist. Shao Qing gently poked at it and saw the young man twitch in pain. Chapter 238. Shao Tong's spiritual power was limited, and there were level 4 superpowered people in the area she needed to block. Therefore, she could only focus on one thing, which was perception. She had to give up on blocking sound. Therefore, they had to be quiet. If they made any noise and were discovered, they would be surrounded immediately. Fortunately, everyone in the cave knew the big picture and knew what was going on. They were all very nervous. Even the young woman who was in a coma had her mouth covered by the girl, for fear that her cough would attract the people outside. The few of them waited quietly, not daring to make a sound. After a long time, they all thought that the person had left, but suddenly, light footsteps approached, accompanied by a voice, "Have you searched here?" Another voice said, "Not yet. It's all mountain walls. What's there to look for? Do you think they can hide in the mountains?" "You're right." The person agreed, then turned and prepared to leave. Xiao Qing and the others breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, a crisp sound was heard. It was not loud, but it attracted the attention of the people outside. He looked back at the vines on the mountain wall and murmured, "Am I hallucinating?" Then, he reached out his hand and lifted the vines. As soon as the vines were lifted, the dark entrance of the cave was revealed in front of him. "There's a question here." Before he could finish, a cold light flashed. He immediately covered his throat, but blood still leaked out from between his fingers. "What's wrong?" The people in the same team as him heard the sound and rushed over. As soon as they arrived, they saw the man fall on his back. Blood flowed out like a fountain. He was shocked and scared. When he was about to call for help, Xiao Qing had already come out of the cave. She held a dagger in one hand and threw it out. The dagger nailed into the man's forehead. The dagger went a few inches into his brain, and the man died immediately. Xiao Qing breathed a sigh of relief, but she also knew that it was impossible for a small team to only have these two people. Dummy and Yan Qiue also came out and went out with her. When they met people, they quietly killed them, and all the corpses were buried in the grass. Xiao Qing only brought them back to the cave after they killed all the people who were searching nearby. Fu Jingmo was sitting there, blaming himself because he was the one who made the sound. Previously, Xiao Qing had given him a gun, and he had been hiding it on his body. Just now, unfortunately, the gun had fallen out of his body and landed on the ground. The noise it made attracted the people outside. There was a saying that there was no story without coincidences. Fu Jingmo was extremely coincidental. Therefore, Fu Jingmo blamed himself. Xiao Qing didn't have time to blame him. This place would be exposed soon. Han Lilin must have sent the teams back to report every once in a while. If the team here didn't report back, Han Lilin would definitely send people to check, and they might be exposed. Xiao Qing still carried one person on her back. She led them to the top of the mountain. When they went up, Xiao Tong had been using her psychic power to explore. She avoided those who could be avoided, and let air die kill those who couldn't. They went all the way up steadily. When they reached the middle of the mountain, the atmosphere changed. Han Lilin must have found that the number of people was gradually decreasing. He learned to be smarter and didn't dare to spread the net everywhere. Because there were fewer people, if they went against Xiao Qing and the others, it would be like sending meat to them. They couldn't even make a splash. Originally, there were 6 people in a team, but now there were 12 in a team. In this way, if they met Xiao Qing and the others, even if they couldn't defeat them, they would have time to signal. Chapter 239. Xiao Qing and the others were even more cautious. After all, if they really encountered the enemy, they would be besieged before they could stop the enemy from releasing the signal. At that time, they would bring a bunch of burdens with them. It would be strange if they could break out of the encirclement. Hold on a little longer. The reinforcements will be here soon. Xiao Qing whispered. According to the time, Yan Hanqing and the others should be on their way back. If they walked faster, they would almost arrive at the survival base in Shilin. Han Lilin had made such a big move, mobilizing so many people to search for Xiao Qing and the others. Moreover, there were also those people that Xiao Qing had let go. Perhaps Yan Hanqing and the others would encounter a few of them. In short, no matter what the situation was, Yan Hanqing and the others should be able to find the place where they were surrounded. As long as the reinforcements arrived, they would be completely safe. Xiao Qing was the calmest among all of them. She kept calculating while walking. Han Lilin had less than 200 people in total, which referred to the paranormals, not ordinary people. This mountain was very large. He would definitely distribute the people evenly and leave some of them to block the entrance and the way out. The number of people used to block the entrance and exit must not be too small. Otherwise, they would be able to break out. In this way, there were at most 100 people on the mountain. If they were divided into more than a dozen teams to search for them all over the mountain, the probability of finding them was still not high. While walking up, Xiao Qing asked Xiao Tong to find a second, safer place. They were now carrying several wounded people. If they encountered Han Lilin's people, it would be extremely disadvantageous. Xiao Qing's idea was to find a safe place to put the wounded people, Fu Jingma, Little Bun, and the others down. They would continue to wander in the mountain and distract Han Lilin's attention. In this way, Little Bun and the others would be safe. Xiao Qing and the others were quite strong. Even if they encountered Han Lilin's people, the possibility of escaping was relatively high. Moreover, all they had to do was wander around and make some noise from time to time to attract Han Lilin's attention. After a while, Xiao Tong found the second safe hiding place. It was obviously safer than the first cave because the entrance was on the side of the cliff. Normal people wouldn't look at the bottom of the cliff due to inertia, so they wouldn't notice that there was a cave entrance 2 to 3 meters below the cliff. Xiao Qing used vines as ropes and put them down one by one. The last one to go down was Xiao Tong. She told Xiao Tong, "Take good care of Little Bun and the others. When we come back, no matter what you hear or see, don't come out. Do you understand?" Xiao Tong nodded seriously and said to Xiao Qing telepathically, "Sister Qing, don't worry. I'll take good care of them." Xiao Qing then put Xiao Tong down. After settling down those who didn't have any fighting power and the injured, Xiao Qing led the others to fight guerrilla warfare. Among them, even the weakest one could easily wipe out Han Lilin's team. Now that they didn't have any burdens, they were like fish that had returned to the sea. They were indescribably relaxed. Previously, they avoided Han Lilin's people. Now, they took the initiative to look for Han Lilin's people, just like hunters looking for prey. As long as they encountered them, Xiao Qing and the others would directly kill them. Sometimes it was a team, sometimes it was a few people who were left alone. As long as they met Xiao Qing and the others, there was no way they could survive. Any one of these people had their hands stained with the blood of many ordinary people. Even if some of them didn't do it willingly, it didn't change the fact that they had been helping the evildoers for a long time. Against such people, Xiao Qing didn't have any concept of mercy. If they met Han Lilin's higher-ups, she wouldn't even let them die easily. That would be letting down those pitiful people who had been harmed by them, letting down the piles of bones in the pit, letting down the people whose families had been destroyed and who had been sold as playthings. If there was enough time, Xiao Qing even wanted to let them fully experience what it was like to beg for death and then send them to chat with God. Ah no, such people could only go to hell after death. On the other side, Han Lilin's face was extremely dark. When he sent people out, he gave the order that every half an hour, one person from each team should report to him. Now, 3 hours had passed, but he had already lost contact with 4 teams. Chapter 240. If only 1 or 2 people had gone missing, it would be fine. After all, there were ferocious beasts roaming around the mountain. It was normal for 1 or 2 people to die. However, 4 teams, more than 50 people, had gone missing. Could it be that these 50 people had run into a wolf's den by themselves? The more Han Lilin thought about it, the more creepy he felt. The biggest possibility was that these 4 teams had been killed by Xiao Qing and the others. It was hard to believe. As the apocalypse progressed, the paranormals gradually leveled up. So far, the highest level of paranormals was only level 4. Han Lilin himself was a level 4 paranormal. It was not a problem for him to fight 3 or 4 level 3 paranormals. However, if there were more of them, he would be helpless. After all, he could kill a master with his fists. How many people did Xiao Qing and the others have? There were ordinary people and children among them. At most, there were 6 or 7 of them. For teams of paranormals, nearly 50 people had been wiped out. Wasn't this a fantasy story? Moreover, there was no news, not even a distress signal. This was still unknown to Han Lilin. If he knew that there were only 4 people, he would probably curse Xiao Qing and the others for cheating. Han Lilin gathered his subordinates and prepared to let them stay close to each other. That way, if some of them were attacked, the others could quickly come to support them. Even if there was no time to support, at least they could release a distress signal. Then, he saw the fireworks exploding in the sky. Xiao Qing and the others had attacked again. This time, Han Lilin did not need to gather his subordinates. Everyone who saw the distress signal rushed to the place where the signal was sent out. Han Lilin was no exception. He waved his hand and said, "Go. Let's go and see." At this time, if one looked down from the sky, he would find that people all over the mountain were consciously gathering in the direction of the fireworks. This time, it was Xiao Qing's carelessness. There was a paranormal with a self-healing ability. It was a very selfish ability, but it was also very powerful. Gu Panpan and Air Dai couldn't get rid of him in a short time. Instead, they let him release the signal. As soon as the signal was sent out, Xiao Qing felt a little headache. She waved her hand, and the vines wrapped around the neck of the last psychic like a snake. She threw him like a sack, and the psychic hit the stone wall. His head was smashed like a watermelon. Retreat. Without wasting a second, Xiao Qing called for her friends and began to retreat. However, at this moment, the paranormals had already discovered the signal and were gathering in this location. Not long after Xiao Qing and the others left, they encountered another group of paranormals. Those paranormals didn't say a word and sent out a few people to entangle Xiao Qing and the others, while the remaining paranormals released a signal. No matter how fast Xiao Qing and her friends were, it was impossible for them to kill a small group of paranormals. When they killed almost all of them, the remaining paranormals surrounded them. Originally, Xiao Qing didn't want to fight. After all, their task was to stall for time, not to kill Han Lilin and the others. However, those paranormals didn't care about their lives and kept pestering them. After all, they were desperados in their bones and were fiercer than ordinary paranormals. Therefore, Xiao Qing and the others were delayed. Seeing those paranormals surrounding them, Xiao Qing sighed. She knew that there would be a tough battle today, and they couldn't escape. Break out as soon as you have the chance. Don't worry about me. Xiao Qing had the space ability, and there were only a few people in the world who could stop her. However, Gu Panpan and the others were beside her, so Xiao Qing couldn't get away. Chapter 241. I know. Yan Qiue nodded with a serious expression. He didn't want to be a burden to Xiao Qing. Han Lilin really hated Xiao Qing to the core. Before he arrived, his supernatural ability arrived first. The 6 flaming blades were aimed at Xiao Qing, not at anyone else, and slashed at her. Some went straight for her eyes, some went for her heart, and some went for her lower body. Xiao Qing was like a fish. She curled up and went through the gap. As soon as she landed, the vines in her hands spread in all directions. Even Han Lilin was surprised by Xiao Qing's move. He didn't expect Xiao Qing to be so bold as to attack everyone at once. Gu Panpan and Xiao Qing had a tacit understanding. As soon as Xiao Qing made a move, she was like a strategic tank, crashing into a position. Those who tried to stop her were either crushed by Yan Qiue or knocked away by Gu Panpan. The only one who didn't move was Air Dai, who was responsible for protecting Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue. Although Dai and Yan Qiue were always jealous of each other, now was not the time for internal strife. Dai was very serious about protecting the two of them. If there were any tricks or superpowers aimed at Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue, Dai would clean them up. Gu Panpan had very good eyesight. She chose a place with the weakest defense to break out of the encirclement. She was the tip of a sharp knife, while Xiaoqing was the blade. With Yan Qiue, the three of them were able to hold off a large group of people. There were also some who tried to take advantage of the situation to deal with Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue, but they were all torn apart by the two dummies within minutes. They broke through to the top of the mountain. How could Han Lilin let them go? Paranormals kept coming. With Han Lilin, a level 4 paranormal, Xiaoqing and the others were held back. Judging from the situation, Xiaoqing and the others had the upper hand. In fact, their superpowers were limited. Han Lilin's men were still coming to help. If this situation dragged on, there would only be one result. They didn't have enough superpowers and would be killed. Xiaoqing was very calm. She also had spirit power, but it was very weak compared to those psychic paranormals. However, after some learning, she could use this spirit power to temporarily act as a psychic paranormal. What she did was to spread out her weak spirit power to explore. Although Xiaoqing's spirit power was very weak and she could only explore within a radius of 12 meters, it was enough. Xiaoqing moved while exploring. Soon, she found several powerful forces, which came from mutant animals. Xiaoqing immediately informed Gu Panpan. They subconsciously walked to the place where the forces were fluctuating. It was very tiring to resist the attacks of a group of paranormals. Although they could kill a paranormal in a few moves, they had consumed a lot of their superpowers. If it went on like this, they would be exhausted and killed in 10 minutes. Fortunately, at this time, Xiaoqing and the others had moved to the designated place. Xiaoqing scanned with her spirit power and found what she was looking for. At that time, Xiaoqing took out a grenade from her space and threw it into the cave. Her action made some people who didn't know the situation laugh directly. If she threw the grenade into the crowd, she might be able to kill a few of them. If she was lucky, it wouldn't be a problem. But what was the use of throwing the grenade into the cave? To hear the echo. Soon, there was an echo, and an ear-piercing roar with deep anger. In the next second, a big tiger with yellow and black fur jumped out of the cave. Chapter 242. Xiaoqing's throw was very accurate. She had probably thrown it right around the tiger. This poor big tiger's fur had been blasted black. It was missing tufts here and there. The tiger didn't know who the culprit was. As soon as it jumped out, it attacked the first person it saw. It was fine if it was just one, after all, it was only a high-level level 3 tiger. But it had a wife, and there was a tigress behind it. The tiger couple jumped into the crowd at that time and started a massacre. The mutant tiger was considered a high-level level 3 mutant tiger. It wasn't something ordinary level 3 and level 3 paranormals could resist. The paranormals who were chasing Xiaoqing immediately became chaotic. Retreat. Xiaoqing took the opportunity to throw Yan Qiue out of the crowd. Yan Qiue used the momentum and landed on a branch. Han Lilin naturally wouldn't let them leave. He was about to chase after them when Xiaoqing whipped him. Coincidentally, he hit the tigress's head. He landed on the tigress's head, and the tigress almost fainted. The tigress turned around and clawed at him. If Han Lilin didn't react quickly, he would have been slapped to the ground. Gu Panpan was at the front and rushed out. Han Lilin was entangled by the tiger and couldn't chase after them. Xiaoqing and the others broke out of the encirclement. Han Lilin was so angry that he stomped his feet. Chase! Chase! Don't let them escape. Han Lilin knew that the foundation he had built with his own hands had been destroyed by Xiaoqing just like that. In the future, he might have to spend the rest of his life on the run. He was a fugitive, and what he was best at was revenge. Before he fled for his life, he had to leave Xiaoqing and the other culprits alive no matter what. It didn't matter even if he had to run for his life. In the survival base, he would go out to rob during the day and hide at night. Once he was surrounded, he would move his base. When the time came, he would find a remote place and lead his brothers. He could either be a bandit or build a small base. He could still live a happy life. Therefore, the same scene appeared again. The four of them were running in front while a group of people chased behind them. At this time, going up the mountain would be courting death. Those who were a little smarter knew that Han Lilin's people were blocking them on the other side of the mountain. Xiaoqing turned around and ran back without saying anything. Yan Qiue was the slowest among the four. He was carried on Xiaoqing's shoulders like a sack. After being jolted all the way, he almost vomited all his stomach acid. They were being chased, and their speed was unprecedentedly fast. Before they reached the foot of the mountain, they saw a group of people rushing over from the foot of the mountain. Xiaoqing was startled, thinking that they were Han Lilin's reinforcements. After taking a closer look, she saw that the leader was Yan Hanqing. Reinforcements had arrived. At this time, Han Lilin had almost caught up with them. As soon as he looked up, he saw the four people slip into the crowd like slippery loaches and then look at him calmly. Han Lilin almost vomited blood at that time. Originally, he was the one chasing them, but now they were chasing him. Han Lilin turned around and ran without saying anything, his speed was faster than a rabbit's. This time, it was Xiaoqing who didn't want him to run. She threw Yan Qiue aside and jumped up. The vines that flew out hooked onto Han Lilin's ankle. Han Lilin ran too fast and was almost bitten off by the vines. At this time, the paranormals from the capital swarmed up. Han Lilin couldn't escape and was tied up like a fried dough twist. There are still some paranormals left at the foot of the mountain. Please go and clean them up. Xiaoqing was relieved and said to the leader. Chapter 243. She glanced over. Oh, it was a familiar face. Wasn't this the captain of the Dark Assassins, Zhu Mochen? Zhu Mochen waved his hand and said lazily, "Brothers, split into 3 teams and search the area. Don't leave a single fish that escapes the net." The ability users under his command immediately split into 3 teams and headed in the direction that Xiaoqing had pointed out. At that moment, the young man named Qing Guanyin jumped out of the crowd. He had washed himself clean and was wearing a simple set of casual clothes. He actually looked quite handsome. "I really have to thank you this time. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to leave this place alive. Those poor people would have been sold to other places," Qing Guanyin said shyly as he scratched his head. Xiaoqing smiled, then said, "As long as someone with a bit of conscience saw something like this, they wouldn't tolerate it." Qing Guanyin smiled, then said, Then what about elder sister Yan?" Along the way, he had encountered many young men and women fleeing in all directions, but he hadn't seen Xie Chunyan. As soon as he saw Xiaoqing, he couldn't help but ask. Xiaoqing frowned slightly, but in the end, she still told him the truth. She also told Qing Guanyin what Xie Chunyan had said before she died. "Before she died, she asked me to pass on a message to you. If you have the chance to meet her younger sister, please take care of her for her." Qing Guanyin's face immediately paled. Xie Chunyan had taken care of him extremely well. She was the nicest person to him aside from his family, but perhaps good people didn't live long. "My condolences." Xiaoqing didn't know how to comfort people, so she said dryly. Zhu Mochen also patted Qing Guanyin's shoulder, then said to Xiaoqing, "I really have to thank you for this. Otherwise, my stupid cousin would have died here." The relative Qing Guanyin was talking about was Zhu Mochen. He had originally wanted to seek refuge with Zhu Mochen, but he hadn't expected to encounter such a situation on the way. Zhu Machen's eyes were bright as he spoke to Xiao Qing. He looked at Xiao Qing with a burning gaze. However, his burning gaze didn't contain any other emotions. Instead, it was filled with battle intent. Although Xiao Qing's scalp was numb, she still stubbornly said, "It's nothing. Since the matter has been resolved, I will go find my companions first. They are still hiding in the cave. Let me accompany Miss Xiao." Zhu Machen grinned slightly and laughed. When he wasn't sleepy, he looked like a very bright youth. It would have been very easy for people to have a good impression of him if his gaze wasn't so hot. Xiao Qing thought that she would ask them how to deal with Han Lilin later, so she agreed. The group of people headed towards the place where Little Bun and the others were hiding. When they arrived, even Zhu Machen sighed in praise. What a good place. If I hadn't known about it beforehand, I definitely wouldn't have gone down to investigate. Xiao Qing released a vine, and the people inside immediately climbed up one by one. Little Bun leapt into Xiao Qing's arms as soon as he came up, almost squashing Yiya. Yiya didn't know whether she was happy or in pain. She was squeezed between Little Bun and Xiao Qing's chests. Seeing how squashed Xiao Qing was, she was probably in pain. After all of her companions were reunited, Xiao Qing glanced at Han Lilin, who was tied up into a ball, and asked, "I wonder how Han Lilin will be dealt with. How will his companions be dealt with? How will those people in the account book be dealt with?" Zhu Machen scratched his head and said somewhat gloomily, "Although the higher-ups insist on enforcing the law, there are some things that they turn a blind eye to. For example, those names in the account book. As for Han Lilin and the others, their abilities will probably be crippled and they will be locked up. After all, they have to consider humanity, so I suggest." Zhu Machen looked at Han Lilin on the ground, his gaze cold. "We don't have to bring them back. We can just say that they were killed during the struggle." Chapter 244. When Qin Guanyin went to the capital, he brought Xiao Qing's phone with him. Zhu Machen and the others had all seen the photos on the phone. They had also heard Qin Guanyin talk about the evil deeds of Han Lilin's group, so they hated them from the bottom of their hearts. Xiao Qing agreed. If Han Lilin didn't get the punishment he deserved when he returned, then it would be better to just kill them and end it all. "You guys aren't." Han Lilin's face was full of fear. If he was brought back by Zhu Machen, some of the people who had a deep relationship with him would definitely protect him. He wouldn't die, but they actually decided to kill him on the spot. Before Han Lilin could finish speaking, Zhu Machen disliked him for being noisy and stepped on his face. "Since that's the case, I'll tell my subordinates that if they catch anyone else, they don't need to keep them alive. Just kill them directly. It'll save them a lot of effort." Xiao Qing nodded. Zhu Machen sent one of his subordinates to inform his team members. Then, the two of them looked at each other and finally said in unison, "Who's going to do it?" Xiao Qing's expression was a little strange as she said, "Let me do it. After all, I'm not a person from the capital survivor base. Even if someone asks you after we return, you can just say that I killed them." Zhu Machen clenched his fists and said, "If you want to do it, then you do it." Xiao Qing rubbed her chin and thought about how to kill him. Xiao Qing didn't want him to die too easily. That would be letting down the piles of bones in the pit and the people who were still alive who had suffered endless humiliation and pain. So she chose daughter. Xiao Qing deliberately cut Han Lilin's neck and put the seeds of the daughter into his body. She put a lot of seeds in and controlled them to take root and germinate in Han Lilin's body. That kind of pain caused Han Lilin's face to distort. His screams were ear-piercing. No one present sympathized with him, especially the youth with the broken leg and the little girl. They were both glaring at Han Lilin fiercely. Very quickly, the seeds devoured Han Lilin's flesh and blood. At this time, Han Lilin was still alive, and his consciousness was very clear. He could even feel countless tender sprouts coming out from under his skin. In other people's eyes, Han Lilin's body was covered with tender shoots. Those tender shoots with a pleasant green color drilled out of Han Lilin's body, broke through his skin, and unfolded 2 tender leaves. It wasn't just 1 or 2 seedlings. Han Lilin's body was covered with seedlings. Below his neck, his entire body was occupied by the growing daughter. At this time, he could still make crackling sounds from his throat. Clearly, he was still alive. Even those who hated Han Lilin to the core couldn't help but feel their hair stand on end. It wasn't until the roots of the daughter pierced into his internal organs that Han Lilin breathed his last. After Xiao Qing dug out the crystal nucleus, she kicked his body as if she was kicking a piece of garbage. She kicked his body into the grass and controlled the daughter to turn into ashes so that it wouldn't affect the surrounding plants. Only then did she say, "As for the remaining accomplices, do you still leave them to me?" Zhu Mochen immediately said, "Leave them to me. I just ordered people to dig a big pit. In a while, all the bodies will be buried in it, so that they won't pollute the environment." Xiao Qing nodded. This was probably an eye for an eye. They created that inhumane pit, so they were destined to be killed by others. After dealing with the accomplices, the people that Zhu Mochen had sent out also returned. They caught all the ability users that were guarding the other side of the mountain in one fell swoop, then buried them on the spot. Only after burying them did they return to report on their mission. Chapter 245. Everything that needs to be taken care of has been taken care of. I should be leaving. Xiao Qing handed the 3 of them to Zhu Mochen, then said, "These 3 are also victims. His leg is broken, and he will need a long time to recover. This is his medicine. I hope you can take them back to the capital and give them a place to stay." Zhu Mochen nodded, "That's not a problem. I can still afford to raise a few people, but I have a request." Xiao Qing raised an eyebrow, "What request?" "Fight with me. Ever since you challenged that Abe Shizuk in the capital, I've wanted to fight with you," Zhu Mochen said eagerly. Zhu Mochen said eagerly. The light in his eyes grew brighter and brighter, causing Xiao Qing's scalp to go numb and goosebumps to appear all over her body. Xiao Qing couldn't help but rub her head. She originally thought that Zhu Mochen was a lazy person, but she didn't expect him to be a battle maniac. She was really tired today and didn't want to fight anymore. As a result, she said, "You've been running around all day, and I've also been busy all day. Neither of us are at our best. How about this, I'll be going to the capital in a while. When the time comes, we can have a good fight, okay?" Zhu Mochen was a bit reluctant, but what Xiao Qing said was true, so he agreed. Then, he said, "Since that's the case, I won't make things difficult for you. I'll take my people back the way we came. Do you want me to send you off?" Xiao Qing shook her head, "It's getting late, and my teammates are also very tired. I'm going to find a nearby survivor base and rest for the night. We'll continue tomorrow. Everyone, be careful." Zhu Mochen immediately said, "Since that's the case, let's go together. It's dangerous to travel at night, and you should be able to recover your strength after resting for a night. We'll fight tomorrow morning, then go our separate ways." "That's a good thing." Xiao Qing was speechless. If she had known earlier, she would have traveled through the night. However, since she had already said it, Xiao Qing could only say, "Then let's go together." The group of people went to the nearest survivor base. The base chief came out to greet them. After all, the title of one of the 4 major mercenary groups in the capital was quite intimidating. After settling down, Xiao Qing first went to exchange for some fresh fruits and vegetables before rolling back to her room to rest. She was really too tired today. Even with her tireless body, she couldn't bear it mentally. So, with Little Bun in her arms, Dumbo in her arms, and Yen Chiue in her arms, she nestled in her bed and fell asleep. When she was about to fall asleep, Xiao Qing was still thinking about how to deal with Fu Jingmo. Although Fu Jingmo's mistake today was just an accident, Xiao Qing still disliked him even more. If it really didn't work, she might as well let Zhu Mochen take Fu Jingmo away as well. At worst, she could just give Zhu Mochen some crystals as a babysitter fee. Moreover, Zhu Mochen's influence wasn't small. Protecting Fu Jingmo should be a small matter. When Dai recovered her memories, if she still needed Fu Jingmo, she could just go to the capital and bring him back. It was convenient and saved her energy. Was there a better choice? After thinking about a lot of things, Xiao Qing quickly fell asleep. The next morning, when she went downstairs, Zhu Mochen and the others were already sitting around the table, waiting to eat. Last night, Yan Hanqing had cooked. Yan Hanqing's cooking was known to be good. After Zhu Mochen freeloaded for a meal, he didn't want to eat the food cooked by his group anymore. Thus, he came over this morning to freeload for a meal. When Xiao Qing saw Fu Jingmo, she remembered what she was thinking about last night. Then, she looked at Zhu Mochen, whose eyes were shining brightly as he looked at the kitchen. He seemed a little unreliable. She should just throw Fu Jingmo to Zhu Mochen. She happily decided. Chapter 246. After dinner, Xiao Qing straightforwardly expressed her thoughts. I want to entrust Fu Jingmo to you as well. He's an ordinary person and it's not suitable for him to wander around with me and face all sorts of dangers. No matter what, things in the capital are more peaceful and life is better. You can bring him back too. I'll pay for his daily food and clothing. Fu Jingmo's face immediately turned pale. He didn't hold his chopsticks tightly and they fell to the ground. After the apocalypse, he had tasted the pain of living under someone else's roof and not being able to eat enough and wear warm clothes. Especially as a normal person who was born in a rich family, Fu Jingmo had suffered a lot. When Xiao Qing appeared in front of him, Fu Jingmo knew that his chance had come. However, because of Dai, Xiao Qing treated him well. At least, she gave him the best food and clothing. She also didn't restrict his freedom and didn't give him any face. She also didn't polish his self-esteem. This was simply unbelievably good treatment. No matter what, he wouldn't give up on Xiao Qing. However, Xiao Qing now told him that she wanted to hand him over to Zhu Mochen and bring him to the capital. This was simply a bolt from the blue for Fu Jingmo, who had some unspeakable thoughts in his heart. He looked at Xiao Qing with a pale face. After a while, he said softly, "Am I holding you back?" Xiao Qing was very calm. "You're just a normal person. My teammates and I often go on missions. The difficulty is high and the danger is high. I can't guarantee your safety. After you go to the capital with Zhu Mochen, no one will make things difficult for you. I'll pay Zhu Mochen crystals to give you the best. You don't have to worry." In fact, Fu Jingmo also knew that this was the best. Xiao Qing was willing to take care of him for the rest of his life because of Dai. However, Fu Jingmo couldn't and wasn't willing to leave. He remembered what happened at that time more clearly than anyone else. Once Dai recovered his memory one day, the stability and comfort he had would become an illusion and would be shattered in an instant. If there wasn't any so-called friendship, Xiao Qing wouldn't care about him anymore. How could he allow such a situation to happen? "I'm not afraid." Fu Jingmo clenched his fists. His face was filled with determination. "I don't want to live a peaceful life. I want to follow you. I can watch the house when you go on missions or accompany you. I can go anywhere. I'm not afraid." Gu Panpan had a good impression of Fu Jingmo. Although he had made a small mistake previously, it wasn't intentional. When she saw Fu Jingmo's pitiful appearance, her heart instantly softened. She said softly, "Sister Qing, why don't we keep him? Anyway, it's just one more mouthful of food. At most, we can let him stay in the base and watch over the house for us when we go on missions." This way, we won't let those ignorant people take over our house. Gu Chuan silently pulled his sister. He now felt that Gu Panpan was the most ignorant person. Xiao Qin clearly didn't like Fu Jingma and wanted to chase him away for a reason. His sister was clearly a smart person. Why couldn't she see through him? However, Xiao Qin still had to give face to Gu Panpan. The rejection that was already at the tip of her tongue was slowly swallowed back down. Xiao Qin glanced at Fu Jingma. Fu Jingma immediately said, "I definitely won't be a burden to you. When we return to the base, I can find a job to support myself. Can you keep me?" Zhu Mochen looked at Fu Jingma as if he was watching a show. He then glanced at Xiao Qin. There was no expression on his face, but his eyes were full of ridicule. "Captain Xiao, have you made your decision?" Chapter 247. Xiao Qin didn't want to say anything more to Zhu Mochen. She nodded and said, "Since he doesn't want to leave, I won't force him. Let's leave it at that for now." Zhu Mochen's interest was immediately piqued. "Since we've decided, let's get down to business. Should we go out and exchange pointers or go to the plaza?" Xiao Qin was speechless. Just how obsessed was this child when it came to exchanging pointers? "The weather is pretty good." Xiao Qin was silent for a while before she suddenly said something. Zhu Mochen mulled it over for a while before he finally understood what Xiao Qin meant. The weather was pretty good, so fighting would ruin the mood. Zhu Mochen wasn't a martial arts fanatic. At most, he was half a fanatic. However, he was extremely curious about Xiao Qin. Zhu Mochen had seen Xiao Qin fight Abe Shirzhua before. She was in a sorry state, but her brilliance was so dazzling that people couldn't take their eyes off her. He had also seen Xiao Qin's decisive and ruthless side. The more he saw it, the more he wanted to know what kind of person Xiao Qin was, and what her limits were. Xiao Qin was determined not to fight with Zhu Mochen. No matter what Zhu Mochen said, she just looked out the window with an expression that said, "The weather is fine outside, and I can't hear anything." In the beginning, Zhu Mochen was quite patient. When Xiao Qin didn't reply, he continued to ask. In the end, no matter how patient a person was, they couldn't take it anymore and he directly took action. In the end, Xiao Qin just sat there calmly. The metal spikes were already in front of her, but she didn't fight back. She didn't even blink. However, Zhu Mochen's eyelids twitched fiercely. He gritted his teeth and said, "You win." Then, he left with his subordinates. Xiao Qin smiled but didn't say anything. Zhu Mochen was still too inexperienced to fight with her. Before they left, the lame boy came over to Xiao Qin with the help of the girl to thank her. He looked at Xiao Qin seriously, as if he wanted to remember Xiao Qin deeply in his mind. Xiao Qin didn't think too much about it. She had killed and saved countless people in her life. If she had to remember all of them, it would be killing her. After sending Zhu Mochen off, Xiao Qin and the others also left. They dawdled for a long time and wasted quite a bit of time. The rest of the journey was smooth, and they didn't encounter any major issues. They only encountered a few high-leveled zombies, and in the end, they all became nuclei in Xiao Qin's storage. Xiao Qin and the others finally returned to the S-City survivor base just before the fruits and vegetables they had bought were almost finished. Before entering the base, they had to check the information. The guards looked at Xiao Qin and the others with a surprised expression. In the past, it wasn't that there hadn't been a team of ability users that left for so long, but most of those teams never returned. They were all wiped out during a mission. Xiao Qin and the others, who didn't return for a few months, were almost sentenced to death. If Yen Ruru hadn't reported to Xiao Qin and the others when they came back, Xiao Qin and the others' household registration would probably have been revoked. However, Xiao Qin and the others came back just like that without any casualties. This was simply a miracle. No, wait, there was one more person. The extra person, Fu Jingma, still had to go through a night of surveillance before he could enter the base, so Xiaoqing and the others went in first. After entering the base, the group of people went straight to the base. Before they even got close, they saw a few people fighting in front of the base, and there were many people watching from the surroundings. When they got closer, they heard that they were actually dividing these two houses. In the beginning, for convenience, Xiaoqing and Yan Hanqing lived close to each other. Later, Gu Panpan and Zhu Machun also moved in. The three houses were neighbors, and the people fighting in front of the gate were fighting over the ownership of these three houses. Chapter 248. The battle had actually come to an end. The loser wiped the blood on his face, left a few harsh words, and ran away. The winner was immensely proud of himself. He stood at the door, wishing he could announce it to the world. Xiaoqing wanted to cover her eyes. She looked up and saw that the lock on the door had been pried open and replaced with a new one. Obviously, her house had long been occupied. Xiaoqing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She stepped forward and patted the shoulder of the man who was about to enter the house. "Brother, who picked the lock? Who opened the door? Who allowed you to live in? The owner of this house is not dead yet." The man turned around and looked at Xiaoqing. He didn't know her, so he thought she was a newcomer. He sneered, "How do you know that the owner of this house is not dead? I also said that he is dead. Go away, go away. I am in a good mood today, so I won't lower myself to your level." Xiaoqing was so angry that she laughed. How could a person who had occupied the Nestle's house be so righteous? She firmly grasped the man's shoulder and said lightly, "What if I insist that you have to show me?" Xiaoqing was very strong. The man struggled twice but couldn't break free. He felt a little embarrassed. He turned back and glared at Xiaoqing. Then he found that Xiaoqing was very beautiful. In the post-apocalyptic world, there were three types of women. The first type was those who looked ordinary and could only rely on their physical strength or a good husband to survive in the post-apocalyptic world. The second type was those who looked ordinary but had special abilities. They could rely on their own strength to earn money for their daily necessities. The third type was those who were beautiful. The last type was like a vine, clinging on to powerful men. They relied on their own bodies to survive. Women like Xiaoqing, who had strength and beauty, were the minority. Just by looking at Xiaoqing's appearance, she was extremely outstanding. Her facial features were exquisite, especially her eyebrows, which were exceptionally alluring. Coupled with her outstanding strength, she carried a confident and powerful aura, which was clearly different from those women who clung on to others like vines. Men preferred to conquer difficult women. So when the man saw Xiaoqing, he even forgot to breathe. Xiaoqing frowned impatiently and said, "This house is mine. You picked my lock and occupied my house. You should give me an explanation, right?" The man's eyes flashed with lust. He reached out to hold Xiaoqing and said, "What else do you want? Let's move in together. You don't have to go out to do any tasks in the future. It's so hard. We brothers will take care of you and make you happy." Just as he finished speaking, before his hand could touch Xiaoqing's shoulder, Yan Qiue grabbed his wrist and twisted it. His bones were twisted into a fried dough twist, and his bones were about to shatter. That person screamed in pain. Yan Qiue snorted coldly and said, "If your tongue isn't clean, you'll pull it out. If your hands and feet aren't clean, you'll break them. If your eyeballs are looking around, you'll dig them out. Am I right? Fuck you." Just as the man was about to curse, a gust of wind swept past his eyes. Then, he felt a sharp pain like a tidal wave. His mouth was torn open, and this was because Xiaoqing had stopped air dye. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as simple as a cut. Just as Yan Qiue said, "If your tongue is dirty, you should pull it out. After all, Xiaoqing didn't want to make a big deal out of this. They had just returned and this house was like their home. Who would fight to the death with someone after returning home after such a long journey? So she softened her expression and said, "This house is indeed mine. Now that the owner is back, please move out quickly. I'll give you 1 minute. If you don't move out, don't blame me for sending you on your way." Chapter 249. Those people were like local ruffians in the base. How could they be willing to give up the house that they had just gotten? Although Xiaoqing and the others weren't there before, Yan Ruru had been helping Xiaoqing and the others to look after the property, so no one dared to occupy Xiaoqing's house. Not long ago, Yan Ruru left the S-City survivor base with her team of paranormals, so they became arrogant. However, after 2 days, Xiaoqing and the others came back. They didn't want to give up the house at all, so they started to curse. Xiaoqing looked at the time and waited for a minute. They still didn't want to stop, so she directly threw them out. There were 7 or 8 people in this group, and all of them were thrown away by Xiaoqing and the others as if they were garbage. Some of them tried to struggle, but their arms and legs were broken. Some of them spoke vulgarly, but their mouths were stuffed with smelly socks. In short, the group of people looked very miserable. Xiaoqing entered the house and couldn't help frowning. All the furnishings in her house were changed, and many used furniture were gone. Xiaoqing tidied up and threw out all the things that had been used by those people, replacing them with new ones. Therefore, before the group of injured people could get up from the ground, they were thrown a pile of rubbish, such as quilts, old sofas, curtains, bowls and chopsticks. Fortunately, Xiaoqing's food storage was still there. She had stored the food in the storeroom. Those people might have just moved in and hadn't had time to search around. Xiaoqing was very satisfied with this. She had done a lot of quests and raided a lot of granaries to save up the food. If it was stolen by someone else, she would be very distressed. Yan Hanqing and Gu Chuan also went back to their own houses to clean up, but Yan Qiue came with Xiaoqing. Fortunately, Xiaoqing's house was not small. There were 2 bedrooms and a bed, which was enough for Yan Qiue to sleep in. In the past, Xiaoqing and Dai slept in the same room, while Xiaoqing slept in the other room. Sometimes, Little Bun would follow Xiaoqing and sometimes Xiaotong. Now, Yan Qiue was added. Xiaoqing's original idea was to put another bed in her room and let Xiaotong sleep there. Dai and Yan Qiue would sleep in the room next door. Then, as soon as the new bedding was laid out, Yan Qiue and Dummy consciously came over to help. The 2 of them spontaneously put the 2 beds together, changing from 2 single beds to a luxurious double bed. Xiaoqing, who's going to drag these 2 lunatics away? Yan Qiue and Dai's intention was obvious. They wanted to sleep with her even when they went home. Although it was a very dirty thing to hug one woman on the left and the other on the right, Xiaoqing didn't want to be dirty at all. She didn't think it was sexy at all. During this period of time, the 2 of them were quite well behaved. In the beginning, when they slept in the same bed, the 2 of them would scheme against each other. They would secretly scratch each other. Xiaoqing couldn't sleep for the whole night. Dai was fine. He was a zombie. It was fine if he didn't sleep for the whole night. Where did Yan Qiue's energy come from? She played with Dai every night. Xiaoqing couldn't sleep for nearly half a month. Later, she got angry and threw the 2 of them out. Only then did they become well-behaved. Xiaoqing's expression was a little bit serious when she was thinking. Dai and Yan Qiue were very familiar with Xiaoqing. When they saw the situation, they knew that Xiaoqing was thinking about how to throw them out. Therefore, the 2 of them tacitly stepped forward. One of them massaged her shoulders, while the other massaged her legs. At this moment, Yan Qiue also gave up fighting with Dumbo. She said very seriously, "Qing, you also know my body. My stomach disease is most likely to act up in the middle of the night. Don't you worry about letting me sleep in another room? Xiao Qing said calmly, don't worry. Yan Qiue choked. Then she lay on Xiao Qing's legs and pretended to cry, Qing, I'm scared. It's so dark at night. I don't want to sleep alone. Please let me stay in your room. Xiao Qing was still very calm, Dai will accompany you. Yan Qiue choked again. Dai was so anxious that he scratched his ears and cheeks. He wished that he could talk and act like a spoiled child. After thinking carefully, Yan Qiue said to Xiao Qing, Qing, you know that once I start experimenting, I'll never stop. I often forget to eat and sleep. I've been researching food that zombies can eat these days. If you didn't wake me up every night, I definitely wouldn't go to sleep. Are you really not worried about me? Xiao Qing touched Yan Qiue's head and smiled, Dai will wake you up. Yan Qiue was completely helpless. She began to roll around and act like a spoiled child. She was determined to sleep with Xiao Qing. This was a good time to cultivate their relationship. What if someone sneaked in to take advantage of Xiao Qing in the middle of the night when he slept in another room? Only when he slept with Xiao Qing at night could he nip those who tried to attack him in the bud. For this reason, Yan Qiue decided to risk everything. He didn't want dignity or face. What could be more important than his wife? Dai also supported him. Xiao Qing would never favor one over another. Either both of them could stay, or both of them would be kicked out. Therefore, he had to support Yan Qiue. At such a critical time, infighting was a very unwise choice. The two of them looked at each other. They quickly took off their shoes and coats and crawled under the quilt. One on the left and one on the right, leaving an empty space in the middle. It was just enough for Xiao Qing to sleep there. Xiao Qing looked helpless, aren't you going to eat this afternoon? The two of them shook their heads at the same time. Eat what? How could eating be so important? Chapter 250. You don't want to eat? Then I'll go out first. Xiao Qing turned around and left calmly. The two men lying in bed were speechless. After Xiao Qing went out, she went to the mission hall first. There was no free time in the apocalypse, so she had to think about the next mission. As for the mission, it wasn't easy to choose. First, it had to be suitable for their current level. Second, it couldn't be too excessive. If any of them got hurt, Xiao Qing would be very distressed. Third, it had to be effective. As for the reward, it didn't matter. Xiao Qing looked through all the missions and finally chose two. One was a bodyguard mission. She had to escort a special paranormal to the forest next to the S-City survivor base to catch some high-level mutated animals. She would only know the details of this kind of mission after she accepted it. What Xiao Qing had her eyes on was this forest. This forest was quite big. When the survivor base of S-City was built nearby, it was because they wanted to rely on the forest to eat the forest. Unexpectedly, after the apocalypse, the mutated animals became stronger and stronger. Instead, the base had to divide some of its forces to monitor the whole forest. It was not worth the loss. However, this task was not the best choice because he didn't know the employer's situation. If the employer was smart, neither arrogant nor selfish, and did things properly, then it would be fine. However, if the employer met a bad-tempered person who insisted on telling him what to do and meddled in every matter, he was afraid that before he encountered any danger in the forest, he would be dealt with by Xiao Qing's family, especially someone with a bad temper like Yan Qiue. The reason why Xiao Qing took a second look at this mission was because the reward for this mission was very generous. There were even 3 special spirit crystals, which were very suitable for Xiao Tong. Moreover, this mission wasn't urgent. She heard that the employer was from another big base and had to stay in the S-City survivor base for 2 months. In other words, they might have to enter the forest more than once. The second mission was an official mission. From the Southernmost Research Institute, there were several expert-level researchers coming over. The research institute there had been occupied by zombies, and these experts were going to be sent to the capital. It was said that they were going to participate in some big project. Of course, this was not the key point. The key point was that the mercenary group that escorted the experts had lost a lot of manpower and urgently needed to replenish their manpower. Therefore, when they passed by the S-City Survivor Base, they issued this mission. From the S-City Survivor Base, they gathered 2 or 3 relatively strong teams of paranormals and escorted them to the capital. This was the second task that Xiao Qing was slightly interested in. He heard that the research project was related to preventing ordinary people from being infected by zombies. This was something that would benefit the country and the people. If Xiao Qing couldn't find a more suitable task for them, he would take this one. The third mission was a cleanup mission, which was to explore and clean up the original S-City. From this, it could be seen that the base leader of the S-City Survivor Base was very ambitious. He wanted to be the second Kyoto Survivor Base. However, the S-City couldn't be cleaned up in a short period of time. Even if it could be cleaned up, it would be very difficult to move back. These 3 missions were the ones that caught Xiao Qing's eye out of the entire mission, and also allowed her to gain experience from her group of companions. However, since they had just come back, they could rest for a while. Xiao Qing didn't immediately choose a mission. Only the mission of escorting the researchers to the capital had a time requirement. Xiao Qing pondered and decided to rest for a few days. If this mission was still lacking people, they could also make a trip. The next day, Fu Jingma came back. The moment he came back, he was sent to Yan Hanqing's house by Xiao Qing before he could even enter the house. Chapter 251. Her excuse was that her house was too big for her. It was not a big house to begin with, but 5 to 6 people were sleeping in it. It was quite difficult for this house. Fu Jingma had just returned. After at most an hour, someone was banging on the door outside. It was only around 8 o'clock, and the hard-working ones had already gotten up. For example, Yan Chiyue was still lying on the bed sleeping when she was woken up by the knocking on the door. She was so angry that she threw an alarm clock outside, but she did not know if it hit anyone. Xiao Qing got up early and was stewing soup in the kitchen. Just as the aroma of the soup wafted out, someone knocked on the door. Xiao Qing wiped her hands and went to open the door. There were many people standing outside the door. The person at the front was someone she was familiar with. It was the group of people she had thrown out yesterday. There were also a few people Xiao Qing did not know, but they seemed to be high-leveled mutants. When the door opened, the person who was beaten the most miserably yesterday immediately pointed at Xiao Qing and said, "Captain, it's her." Xiao Qing raised her eyebrows and laughed. "What's wrong? You took someone else's house, and in the end, you still want to settle the score with the owner? I'm a protective person. No matter what, you beat up my brothers. This matter can't be settled just like this. Otherwise, people will say that our Kunpeng mutant team is a group of cowards." The leader was a fair-skinned young man, but his words were not very reasonable. Coincidentally, Xiao Qing was also a very protective person. She would help those close to her and not reason with them. Hence, she nodded in understanding and said, "How do you want to settle this? Tell me, I'll accept it. You're a straightforward person. You're a straightforward person. Since we're all paranormals, I won't bully you. I heard that you're also a paranormal team. So, let's start a game and learn from each other. 5 games, 3 wins. If you lose, you have to apologize and compensate for my brother's medical expenses. This matter will be over. If I lose, I'll also apologize to you and compensate for your mental damage. How about it? What do you think?" Xiao Qing nodded. This condition was actually not too much. After all, the apocalypse was an era where people used their fists to reason. Whoever had the bigger fist would be on the side of reason. She said that others had taken her house first, so it was reasonable for her to fight back. However, if she was not able to beat these people and was thrown out, no one would help her get her house back. It was that realistic. I want to add one more condition. If you lose, he and his brothers will have to crawl away. Xiao Qing smiled and said in a very cold voice. Although she understood that the person who came to pick a fight because of her, it didn't mean that she didn't have a temper. She had occupied her house and dared to talk dirty. After being chased away, she called someone to come and take revenge. She had repeatedly challenged her patience. Did she really think that she was a sick cat? As soon as Xiao Qing's words came out, the face of the leading fair-skinned youth turned ugly. He said coldly, "That will depend on your ability." Xiao Qing nodded and clapped her hands to call Dai. Then, she said, "Go and call Pan Pan, Gu Chuan and the others. If they're free, they can come and watch the show." Dai obeyed. To put it bluntly, with Xiao Qing's strength, it was not a big problem for her to challenge ordinary small bases. She really did not care about these people in front of her. Not long after, Gu Pan Pan and the others all came over. Even Yan Qiue was yawning, and there was even a strand of hair on her head that had curled up from sleep. Xiao Tong followed behind her. Xiao Tong was holding Little Bun in her arms, and Little Bun was holding Ye in his arms. To be honest, compared with the opposite side, Xiao Qing's group was like a mob. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.